Hello, everyone, and welcome to Leduc, Alberta for the Curling Stadium Alberta Curling Series Men's Major Tournament. My name is Matthew Hall. Joining me in the booth is none other than Chelsea Carey. Hi, Chelsea.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. So we got a very good matchup coming up here. These are the C finals. There are only 2 games on the ice. We'll bring you all the action from Reid Carruthers versus Korey Dropkin. The other matchup is Tanner Horgan versus Rylan Kleider, fighting for those last 2 spots in the playoffs. What do you think about this matchup, Chelsea, and what do you think we're going to be seeing from these 2 teams?
I think it'll be a great game. It'll be very interesting to see Team Dropkin with a little bit more of a familiar lineup to us. One change at the third position with Andrews Tapera coming in to replace Joe Polo, but big changes to Team Reid Carruthers. Reid back to skipping, and Jason Gunlickson, who we all have known as a skip for the last little bit, moving down to third on that team. So really curious to see how the dynamics are with that new group. And yeah, both great teams. So should be a great game.
Absolutely. We just, as we started, caught the tail end of the draw for Hammer there. Korey making his way down to the other end. So I'm going to guess that Reid Carruthers was able to come away with the hammer to start this game. At this level, Chelsea, how important is getting that hammer to start the game?
It depends on which stat you look at, but you always want the hammer in the even end. So getting it in the first end is great, but in a perfect world, you figure out a way to get it in 2 and 4 and 6 kind of thing. So it's always a bit of a sort of scoreboard management situation with that. But the more you have it, the better off you are. The last time I checked the stats, it was a slight advantage as far as your win percentage, but that varies by team a little bit as well, depending on what kind of strategy you use when you have the hammer in that first end.
So we do see here that it was Reid Carruthers winning the hammer to start this game, so advantage them for sure to start. Do you think we'll see these teams? I know Reid being out of Manitoba for so long, Manitoba is generally regarded as being very good hitters, and of course having Jason at Vice, one of the hardest throwing probably curlers on the circuit. Do you think we'll see maybe a bit more defensive play, or are we far enough in the weekend where they'll be comfortable? And do you expect to see some rocks in play early?
I would guess that we'll see some rocks in play. We were actually curling ourselves this weekend. Unfortunately, didn't go well enough for me to be playing today, but so I haven't had a chance to watch it really. But my guess would be that they will probably feel pretty comfortable by this point. In my experience, the ice in Leduc is quite good, so my guess would be that you'll see a little bit of offense early. This is their second game today, and they're probably fifth or so game in the event. So should be pretty comfortable. You don't often see in men's curling a defensive start. Usually if you see a blank in the first end, it's because somebody made a run double or something and cleared all the rocks out of the house. You don't often see them kind of throw one in and then go hit. It's not that common. So it looks like we're going to get some rocks in play early here with the guard thrown by Team Young Bucks USA and Korey Dropkin.
Yeah, and it's certainly been a grind for these 2 teams, as it always is when you end up on the seaside in a triple knockout. For both of these teams, it's their 7th game already on the weekend, and they started Friday morning. So maybe we could see a little bit of fatigue by the end, but I'm sure they put a lot of work in during the summer to make sure that they're ready physically for this.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you sort of have to now to be competitive at this top level. It's I guess I shouldn't say a requirement, but it's just kind of the standard that's been set now. So for sure fatigue setting in a little bit, but these guys are all in the kind of shape that they need to be to prepare for this kind of a situation and playing this many games leading up. And so I don't think that will factor into who comes out on top of this game.
Absolutely. And just looking at how we got started, your prediction was correct. We saw Dropkin throw up a guard to begin the game, and Carruthers just slipping a little deep.
Yeah, a little deeper than they would have liked for Reid, but that's not a perfect freeze. The weight was pretty close for Team Dropkin, but a tiny little angle on the high side there and a little bit of a bounce. So an opportunity here for Connor Negevin, although it looks like this one might be hanging too. This spot seems to be fooling them a little bit early with being a bit faster and straighter than they're thinking it will be.
And I apologize if I sounded a little bit confused there. We have the colors backwards on our graphic, so I was trying to figure out who was throwing what color rock. But it is Dropkin throwing the red stones, sitting shot on the button, and another slight mistake there by the Carruthers team, slipping a little bit deep. So really a good chance here for Korey to put a rock in a good spot, albeit these guys can hit so well. I don't think it'll be long until we see that center guard coming back and moving things out of the way. But if you can get this maybe just slightly to the inside, towards the center line side on the freeze, you sort of negate at least giving them the ability to make the run double.
Yeah, it probably stays if it's on the center line side, and the back one probably always takes that yellow with it. So what you're likely to see is the house almost cleared with maybe the exception of that back yellow. I actually think that's pretty close to perfect. They would have maybe liked it to curl an inch towards the center line there, but pretty good result for Team Dropkin.
Definitely, and taking no time here, immediately calling the run back. Reid Carruthers is backed up by Connor Negevin at lead and Jason Gunlickson at vice, both of them coming uh, from their own teams playing together last year, as Derek makes an excellent shot, getting all the Reds moving. Uh, and Derek now played with Reid for quite a while. I want to say at least 6 to 8 years, maybe the last two quadrennials. Do I have that right, Chelsea?
Yeah, the last two quads, I believe, and they also played together in juniors. Derek and Reid have been teammates for a very long time. And Derek, in my opinion, we mentioned Gunner with the or Jason, sorry, Gunlickson with the upweight ability. I think Derek is one of the more underrated seconds in the game for both his upweight and his draw ability. He's a very very good player. So they've certainly got all the bail abilities you could ever want between those two in the middle. So should be fun to watch with some bombs coming down at you when they get in some trouble, which we just saw, and of course Derek making a pistol of a almost run double on those two shots. But mission accomplished there for Derek and for Team Carruthers, just opening up that 4 foot. So that worst case scenario, Reid at least has a shot for one. Because if that didn't happen, if he missed that run back, it was getting pretty congested there in that button area.
And as we watch this end progress, looks like we might, with a couple red stones, they're likely going to see Reid hit here. The opportunity to maybe roll Frozen to one of those other stones and set up Deuce that way. But talk to me a little bit, especially with this being the first year of a new quadrennial. It's been very rare to see any team sort of come through unscathed from last season. The only one I can really think of off the top of my head might be the Colton Flash team. Has the same four players, but what do you guys do as a team in the off season or in these early events to really get to know each other well? Obviously, everyone's going to throw slightly different, so those are things they need to learn. And we've seen some teams that maybe on paper in these first couple events of the year who should be doing very well are just sort of having to do a little bit of extra work to shake off the rust. So maybe could you talk a little bit about the process there and what that feels like, especially in these early events, what you're doing to combat sort of that rust?
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit of a learning curve. And this event being so early in the season, I'm sure a lot of these players have the same challenge that we as a team had, which is that a lot of us don't have practice ice yet. So the rust is very real. You're dealing with a whole summer off and potential injuries and those kinds of things. But yeah, it definitely you spend a lot of time in the summer doing some of the theoretical things, the team dynamics, getting to know each other's stress reactions and those kinds of things in like I say a theoretical way because you're not together physically sometimes, and certainly you're not on the ice together for most of those teams. So you can only do so much as far as that goes. You can't figure out throws and releases. Now these guys have played against each other so much that you probably have a pretty good idea, like if you're a guy who's joining Kevin Cooey's team, you probably know that his out turn is deadly. Like, you know that as an opponent. So there's some of that you can garner from having played against them. But there's for sure a learning curve, and not only a learning curve, but what a lot of teams do now is purposely try to doctor their throws and releases so that they're closer matched to each other than maybe they were before they joined forces as teammates. So you'll actually see people tweak things to make it more like this person or that person, or especially when you have, EJ Harnden, for example, is joining Team Gushu, who have all tweaked and sort of aligned their throws and releases in the past. So he probably has to make some adjustments where the rest of them probably don't. Same for Tracy Fleury joining Team Holman. They throw a certain way. And so often you'll see the new player or new players adjust to each other and try to align those things. So that just takes reps and time. So sometimes when you see not a lot of success early, that's, people have made major changes to the way they throw the rock. It's going to take a little bit of time to get that grooved and figured out for the broom holder, for the sweepers, for the thrower. It affects everybody when you make those changes. But most of the teams that have put together new foursomes this year are looking at 4 years. So they're not that worried about doing well this year. Obviously, you always want to do well, but their goal is to win in 4 years, not to win today in September in the first year of the cycle. So no one's terribly concerned about a bit of a slower start. Their goal is to be ready for those Olympic trials, in 3.5 years' time.
Right, and as we watch this end progress through, opportunity here for Dropkin to get the force on you. Think maybe if you saw the end a couple shots ago, would have had the chance maybe to get out of it with a blank here for Reid to start the game. But if Korey hits this on the nose, it's going to be very difficult for him to do that. I think he'll be looking to possibly freeze something or maybe hit and roll to try and group the stones. Maybe he can make a double and roll out for the blank on his last or something like that. But definitely looking like a force here coming up for Team Dropkin.
Yeah, it is for sure. And I don't think I agree with you. I think you're going to see Reid throw some kind of a freeze. I don't think you'll see him hit, just because to quote the great Russ Howard, if you're going to be forced to 2.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, and you're probably not getting a deuce out of it, but if you make a good freeze and they blast everything, then you still get your blank. Oh boy.
Well, as we're in the middle of that
We
thought,
jinxed him.
everything
Classic commentator jinx there.
yeah, it happens every time. If you want one team to win, just start talking about how well the other team's playing, and then things will change. But yeah, just getting caught, and those can always be a little bit tricky going out really wide like that in the early ends. Of course, with practices before the game, you spend probably 90-95% of your shots drawing to the button. So anytime you're forced into an odd spot like that, now, this is their 7th game of the weekend, so I'm sure they've thrown enough out there to have a good idea. It was probably just a bit of a miscue on the throw, but those can, if you're going to get misses like that, it's usually out wide or sometimes even down the center line where you're not necessarily breaking in the path as much with your first stones. Now, usually you might see that grind in a little bit more and miss on the over curl side, but maybe just sent that out a little bit and didn't quite have enough curl to come back.
Yeah, what can be tricky is that going out wide in the early ends can be a bit of a guessing game, because if you have fresh pebble, it might really curl, but sometimes there's a ridge out there. So they often, what curling clubs will often do to get a little bit more curl in the ice is what's called dish the sheet. So they'll make the center line a little bit low, and it'll come up in sort of a little mini bowl shape. So then usually there's a ridge somewhere where it'll go straight and it won't curl towards the middle. And it looks to me like Korey may have found that ridge, but it's hard to know that because it also could hit fresh pebble and really curl. So those can be a little bit tricky early in the game.
Mm-hmm. So now what looked to be almost pretty much a guaranteed force has now turned into fairly easy 2 here. No real options here if you're Korey. I don't see any possibility. I think if you try to roll under that corner guard, you're probably too far. Yellow's still sending 1. So just hitting this rock and conceding the deuce, I would have guessed.
I think so. I agree. I mean, you could try to roll half buried and hope you get a miss, but that's the best you could do, and it's pretty precise. So basically, at this point, I think you got to take your medicine after that. Whether it was a bad break or maybe a not a great throw on Corey's first, you pretty much take your medicine and kind of give up your two here.
And looks like no mistake on this one. Sweepers will just clean it up to the nose, and it'll be an open hit opportunity here for Reid. I'm sure any game, if you can come in and score that too early, still plenty of game left, but puts you in that strong position of confidence too. Just, that you've made your shots, that you were able to execute what you wanted to do early, and it gives you that momentum going into the middle part of the game.
Yeah, and it does that one does significantly increase your odds of winning. Again, last time I checked, we could maybe ask Mr. Gertz if he has these numbers. But last time I checked, giving up a single or scoring a single in the first end doesn't necessarily change your odds of winning that much. But getting two in the first end does significantly change it. So huge miss by Korey Dropkin and big opportunity for Reid here. And yeah, lots of game left, certainly not over, but that end took quite a big turn twice, actually. We saw a couple momentum changes there.
And so, final rock coming here in the first end from Reid Carruthers. Sweepers don't seem to hate it. They like the weight. Line's pretty close. And he'll remove that red stone, stick around, score his 2 points. We'll take a quick commercial break before we come back. Reid Carruthers will take a 2-0 lead in the second end here in Leduc. And welcome back to Leduc. We resume this game in the second end of play. Reid Carruthers coming away with a bit of maybe a surprising two there. We saw some uncharacteristic misses on both sides, but I think the biggest one was definitely that flash by Korey out wide. Regardless, Reid Carruthers converts, gets his two, and they move on to the second end of play here. Now, I'm sure you're not necessarily worried if you're Korey, still plenty of game to play, but just while we were there in the break, we took a look at the numbers, and we were talking about percentages taking two to start the game, and you're around 75% at this level for men. So definitely a comfortable position, would you say, Chelsea, if you're Reid? But certainly, I don't think you're necessarily all that worried if you're Korey either. Still plenty of game to come back.
Yeah, I don't know that you're worried if you're Korey, but you really want a deuce here. I
Hmm.
think that the biggest mistake that some teams make is not realizing how much trouble you're in when you're one down without. Like that's a bit it's not panic mode, but it's really close because you're in a bigger hole than you think you are. It's only a 1 point difference, but it's full control to the other team because they have the hammer and the lead. And the better the teams are, the better the leader is statistically. So, if you're in this position in club curling or in a local tour bonspiel and you give up a two in the first end, you're in less trouble than Korey Dropkin is right now because Team Carruthers is going to be that much better with the lead than a club curling team. So not panic, not concern necessarily, but Korey is going to go pretty hard for two here. You don't want to get forced.
Absolutely. Especially, I mean, it becomes much more important the later on you get in the game who has hammer when, but even early in the game, I usually try to think of it as an extra like 10-20% boost towards your side. So if you think you're in a tied game, maybe a lot of people who are a bit less experienced might think, okay, well, 50-50 chance with still a few ends to go, but that's not really the case. I think most games, especially at this highest level, aren't are more won by controlling the scoreboard and controlling the hammer than necessarily just playing the ends out. Especially even this early, we know how quickly an 8 end game can go by, so you can't fall behind too quickly.
Yeah, and it definitely is that way. It's a lot of scoreboard management when you get to a certain level, and it totally changes your strategy, your approach to the end, what you can tolerate. Like if you're Reed right now, you love giving up a single point. Well, if you're already down one, you don't love giving up a single point.
Mhm.
But right now, it's a great opportunity for Reed to say, like, here, take your one. I love you getting one. I get the hammer back, and I'm one up. So rather than being worried about them scoring at all, you actually want them to, but only one. Even two isn't the worst because you've got the hammer. So you're back in that situation that you were in the first end when you won the draw to the button. So definitely advantage Reid Carruthers here, and down by two, we would call that control for Team Carruthers. But for Korey here, lots of chances to get two, and with most curling club surfaces, with really anything, there's always a chance of steals. It's certainly um there's certainly plenty of opportunity left, but like I say, for Korey really wanting to get that deuce here, or a blank plays just fine. He would be okay with a blank and try again to set up that deuce the next end. He just really doesn't want to be forced to a single point here if he could help it.
No, that makes total sense. I was just looking back at seeing how much these teams have played this year, but I believe this is the first event for both of these sides. I've seen, of course, the feels like the curling season gets earlier every year. We start creeping into August at the past couple of years, even. But I've noticed maybe a bit more than the last couple of years. Teams are taking a little bit of time off. I was looking earlier this weekend at, for example, someone like Einerson or Gushu. I believe both of their first events will be the Curling Canada Invitational, which is even 2 weeks from now. And I think it's maybe in the past couple of years been a bit odd to see teams wait that long to get their first events in. Do you think that just has to do with the fact that we're sort of at the start of quadrennial, and obviously points and jockeying for world ranking is always important, but maybe not so much this year when you're not fighting for Olympic trials berths and really coming up to the end of that quadrennial? How is that sort of affecting how teams generate their schedules?
I think it I think it goes both ways. I would suggest to you that the reason those 2 teams have done it that way is because they're Team Canada and they don't need to play, a bunch and peak in December and January. They don't have to peak till February and March for their national championship again. So they can afford to take it, and they're both ranked so high in the world that they're gonna be in slams, they're gonna be in every invitational thing. I think what it does to some teams that maybe put together a new team and don't have as many points or are right on the border for getting into those slam events and that points bet event and that kind of thing is it means you have to play more early to earn those points while more established teams kind of lay back and don't play. That's maybe your opportunity to jump ahead of them in the standings and get qualified for those things, which I understand they're not giving away Olympic berths this year, and that's true, and it does factor into people's planning. But if you're not getting into slam events and those top level events, then your chances of getting that Olympic trials berth are getting slimmer and slimmer. So some teams will look at it as an opportunity to play a lot early and try to generate some of those points and maybe move up the rankings a little bit more while the top teams take it a little bit easier. If you're Team Canada, if you're Gushu and Anderson, it makes sense to take it easy early. Plus, they're also both playing in that Pan Continental Championship in November in Calgary. So they'll basically just play slams in that, both of them. When I looked at their schedules, which I mean, if I were them, is probably what I would do as well. You've played a hard 4 years. I mean, if you're Anderson, you've played your season when you win the Scotties and go to Worlds is incredibly long. You get no breaks.
Hmm.
You play the Scotties in February, play Worlds in March, you go to the Players Championship in April, and then the Champions Cup in May, well, late April, early May. and you just don't get a break. So 3 years in a row they've done that. That's an insanely intense schedule. So it makes a lot of sense to me for them to say, "Yeah, no, we don't need to go crazy early. We've got a lot of points. We know we're Team Canada. We're just gonna kinda chill early and play some slams, and they're not in much danger of falling out of getting those invites." But for teams that are on the cusp or in danger of falling out of there, you'll see those teams play a little bit more early because they're trying to keep those spots.
No, that makes total sense. So it basically all just boils down to where your position is right now, and if you're already sort of not necessarily worried about having to qualify for the slams, you can take a little bit time off, take it easier, and rest your bodies, which is really good. I mean, I think you see a lot of teams that are trying to break through where they play a lot in the first couple months and do quite well. Um, Move up the rankings, earn their way into those slams, and then they sort of come up against a bit of a wall. And whether that's just obviously the competition at the slams are that much better, or they just sort of wear themselves out early, it's something you have to be very careful with every year, and pay a lot of attention to exactly how you're setting your schedule, in relation to what your goals are. I mean, if you're one of those top teams, then you have to set your schedule to try and peak for the Scotties or the Brier or whatever it is you want to do. And if you're trying to break through, then maybe you try and peak a little bit earlier to gain all those points.
Absolutely, and I mean, it is that, and I do think that there's that burnout is a big factor, and the fact that the season is getting longer and longer is making it more and more challenging and not as easy on the athletes. And you're seeing people retire earlier, and you're seeing people with injury issues that we didn't used to see as frequently, and that's all to do with the length of the season and how intense that schedule gets. So, every team is dealing with that a little bit differently. Everybody has their own opinion about how you do it. Do you play less? Do you maybe bring in an extra player? Do you play with a spare? Do you just play slant? Like there's a bunch of different ways to approach it, but everyone's trying to manage that burnout and that fatigue with how long the season is getting.
I hear around the club all the time nowadays. Do you think we'll ever see sort of a year-round schedule? And I don't think that'll necessarily happen. I think just generally in sport, you need to have an off season. You need to have time to heal your body. Just have that time off, even mentally. It's a good thing. But we're seeing a lot more nowadays. Lots of facilities have, uh, if not year-round ice, it's getting pretty close to. I think there's one in Manitoba that might have gotten their ice in quite early. I know there's a few places in Ontario that get their ice in start of August, and it sort of is creeping more and more towards the possibility of a year-round sport. I don't know if it'll ever make that last jump to that, but what are you seeing? I know I'm more in Ontario, you're maybe a bit on the west, more to the western side of the country. Do you see the same things happening out there?
It hasn't really changed out here that much. The Saville Community Center where we were playing this weekend in Edmonton, they only take their ice out for I think a month or two total. But in Calgary, we still don't. I think the Calgary Curling Club put their ice in last week, but that was the first one, and I think it's the only one right now here. So, I mean, I think it's to do with it's a bit of a response to the rest of the world because certainly that's a thing that's happening overseas and in Europe and Asia. Those teams are practicing all summer and playing all summer. For me personally, I think it's a little bit much. And the other thing to factor in there is that most of us in Canada have like jobs and we're not full-time curlers. Most of us aren't. We can't be. We would like to be, but it's just not realistic to do that. So it gets tough. I mean, for me, I like the break. I'm also, towards the back half of my career versus the front half. So my body's telling me to take the time off. And that's, everybody's got to do what they feel like they need to do. But then you look at somebody like Jennifer Jones, who has been around forever and plays every single event. It's just the fact that she plays as much as she does blows my mind, but it works for her that way. Where other teams do better when they don't play as much, when they play a more selective schedule. Old Team Botcher, for example, um, skipping slams, like turning down slams, several of them, just to stay local, to play more, and to try to find a balance with the rest of their lives. So it's very individual, and every team gets to decide that for themselves, which is what's nice. But yeah, I hope it doesn't ever go to a full year thing. I think that that's a bit crazy. There's very few sports in the world that do it that way, and I don't think curling needs to be one of them or the first one or whatever, however that looks like. Every major professional sports league has an off season. So
Hmm.
I hope that we still get to have one because I think that, like I say, I mean, with what we're seeing with earlier retirements and injury issues and things, I don't think we need it to be any longer. But the rest of the world, beating Canada as much as they have been recently, I know is concerning for people. So you're seeing that, I think, somewhat as a response to that.
No, absolutely. And a lot of other countries are sort of seeing the same trend. I think, um, off the top of my head, I apologize if I don't have this right, but I think Korea gets their ice usually halfway through the summer, and they're just on a lot longer um, than most teams on this side of the world are, especially in those early events. You sometimes see those international teams doing very well,
Right.
just because they've had that little bit more time to practice and hone their abilities a little bit. And I promise we'll
Yeah.
talk a little bit about this game, but this end just seems to be progressing towards a blank here. They've just been exchanging hits for a while, and here the opportunity for Korey to come out of this second end with a blank end, move on to the third, and he'll look to score his deuce then.
Got a broom on it, so it looks like it's good. No mistake there from Korey Dropkin.
And so it is a blank end. The score will continue to be 2-0 Carruthers, and we'll be right back after a quick commercial break. And we are back here in Leduc for the Alberta Curling Series Men's Major. I'm Matthew Hall. Joining me in the booth is Chelsea Carey. And you said you mentioned at the start of that last end that Korey would have really been thinking about getting a deuce there, but things sort of fell apart very early on that end, and we just saw an exchange of hits through, ended up making the hit and roll out for the blank. When does it start becoming imperative to really go hard for that 2 points? I mean, there's still a fair bit of time left to go in the game, but only 5 ends. If you continue to blank, eventually there becomes a point where you say, okay, and you have to start taking on a lot more risk to try and go for that two to get yourself back in the game. How long do you think Korey would be able to wait here before he has to make that decision? Are we pretty
Um,
close?
we're well, not necessarily. It depends on their sort of mantra as a team. For sure, what you don't want to do is get that 2 and 7 and be tied coming home without the hammer. So I would say 6 at the very latest. I don't think you're going to see it go that long before he gets pretty aggressive, but that's the very latest you would want to get your two. Because if you get 2 and 6 and you're tied, then if either team scores 1 and 7, you're pretty happy. If you get 2 and 7, you're in men's curling, it's somewhere around 85 or 90% chance you lose that game tied without the hammer coming home. So you don't want that. You need to be going hard. If you're still in this position in 7, you're probably playing pretty hard for 3 in 7 instead of 2.
Absolutely. We see Connor Negavan slipping a little bit deep there on that come around on the center. So maybe they look like small miscues. The fact that that center guard didn't end up on the center line, and then the second one slips a little bit deep and allows Korey. I think it's huge that allows him sort of the free opportunity to come around this guard, and you could probably get into a good spot and actually be shot. So just that little bit off for Connor, but I think it makes a big difference in how this end is going to progress.
Yeah, I think that that's the biggest thing is exactly what you just said. If Connor's anywhere where this couldn't be shot and buried, then it's acceptable. But to allow him a free chance, Corey's probably coming around that guard anyways, even if it was just for second shot. But it makes a big difference to Team Dropkin that they could be shot rock there. Now, unfortunately for them, that didn't quite get buried, so Derek can chase it. But yeah, that rock going deep enough that you had room to be shot and buried around that corner guard is a significant mistake.
And so we see Derek Samigalski being asked to remove this stone with some light weight. Will roll into the forefoot and remove that stone. Definitely, it was a bit surprising on that last Dropkin stone. I think I was watching, I'm sure you haven't been watching too many of these games. You were probably busy with your own event just down the road. But earlier in the weekend, we tended to see a lot more hard finish at the end. I'm not entirely sure if they touched up the stones at all before this event started. I would imagine they did fairly recently with it being so soon in the season. But do you see that a lot at events, whereas you tend to get towards the playoffs and the end of the weekend, things tend to straighten out? Or is it just sort of you always have to be aware of what's going on and it could go either direction in the middle of an event? Do you just generally see that the Rocks maybe become a bit less aggressive?
Yes, for sure. I think our general expectation in an event would be that it would get straighter as the event goes on. And the longer the event, the more drastic that difference can be. So sometimes what you'll see at a long event, at the Scotties, the Brier, the Olympic trials, those kinds of things, is that they'll actually touch up the rocks mid-event to try to keep it to try to keep some of the curl, because get it can get quite straight because the rocks just buff out the more you play with them. So I'm not terribly surprised that that's the case. You're right. I didn't get to watch very much of this early on, but I'm not surprised that it's getting straighter. And I don't think that any team that's been at this for any length of time, which certainly both these teams have, I don't think it would surprise either of them that it's gotten straighter.
Yeah, I know what you mean about sometimes they do like to touch up rocks in the middle of an event. Generally, obviously not tour events, but at those national championships or provincials. I specifically remember a couple times when I was competing at junior nationals or the Ontario Tankard a couple years ago. We just showed up to the arena. There was a note on the locker room door saying the rocks have been touched up, and usually I would say a lot of the players aren't necessarily fans when that gets slapped on them in the first thing they see in the morning with no warning. But it's something that they generally have to do to keep the curl throughout, especially a long event, week long national championship or something like that. So um, definitely a trend for sure.
Yeah, and I don't think you're going to see it go away. I think where I've seen players get upset about it more often is when not everyone is necessarily notified. They used
Hmm.
to sometimes it would happen, and some teams knew and some teams didn't, and who knows? There's lots of rumors both ways about those kinds of things. But now, generally, it's fairly accepted that it's going to happen. So we usually all the competitors will get every team competing will get an email from either the organizing committee or the head ice technician saying that they are going to touch them up tonight. They'll usually give you some details about how aggressively they're going to do that so that you can come in for your next draw with the expectation that it's going to be back to that little bit more curl, with the expectation that maybe the rock notes that you had aren't going to be as accurate for a game or two until that new touch up buffs out. But it's better than having stick straight ice in the final, because that's the other alternative essentially.
Hmm.
So it's I think it's the lesser of two evils, but it does create a bit of challenge in the middle of the week trying to learn all over again when you feel like you've just gotten it figured out.
Yeah, I remember back specifically, I can't remember exactly what year it was. I want to say it was 2 years ago at the Briar. Um, there was I don't want to say scandal, maybe controversy, just is the better word. I remember Glenn Howard being very upset before one of the draws that they had touched up the rocks, and I think, as you said, they had. You don't exactly know how everything happened, but what seemed to be the case was some teams were aware that the rocks were touched prior to their practice, and some teams weren't, and that can definitely be uh, a distraction, or it can be something that can um, really upset some players when not everyone has access to the same amount of information. So I think that's the key for sure.
Yeah, that I was thinking of exactly that instance actually, and that's not the first time it's happened. Hopefully, it is the last time, and who knows what was said or what wasn't, or which teams knew. I mean, we'll never know those details, but for sure, everyone should have access to the information because then again, it's a level playing field. It's the same as the old cliche, like the ice is the same for both teams, right? So at least if both teams know that they've been touched up, then it's a matter of it becomes more a battle of who's going to figure it out first, but at least you both know what you're dealing with going in. That's for me is the only thing that matters. As long as everyone's aware of what's happening, then it's fine.
hmm And so as we look at this end, things seem to be shaping up quite well. I think you're pretty happy if you're the Carruthers team. Um, but I mean, definitely some opportunities here for Dropkin. I think maybe a little bit upset that that last freeze sort of was just a little heavy, happened to roll off. I'm sure just at first glance, you probably like it if you're yellow, just there's so many yellow sitting around in the rings and no real red to work with. But Korey would definitely have the opportunity there to, if you could stay maybe a bit closer to nose, you push that behind the T line. Now you have a couple rocks to freeze to, stuff to work with. I think Jason could likely get up to the nose and remove this rock, but definitely some opportunities here for Korey to rearrange some rocks and get themselves in good position.
Yeah, the opponent's rocks, all rocks for Corey right now, in theory, are his friend, especially if they're behind the T line. So, not a terrible situation for Red, even though it looks like it's a bit scary, and it is a bit scary. But if Gunner can get to the nose here, it's going to be some trouble for Corey Dropkin.
Now on it to try and get a little bit of extra curl at the end. We'll make contact with the shot stone and remove it out cleanly. So, yeah, now I think whereas before you probably had some options to work with. Now I think if there weren't before, there's definitely some alarm bells going off in Korey's head right now. How does he rearrange this? Can he follow uh, them down the same way Jason just did? Maybe make the double, or would you think about throwing something a little bit less and just try and rearrange these rocks a little bit?
I think you're trying to rearrange them. I think you can make a bit of a wall here if you hit this close to the nose, but with sort of back line, maybe hack weight, and try to just split those back two yellows, the one you're hitting and the one on that left side edge of the forefoot as we look at it right now, and try to stay in the middle. Then you've got a kind of a wall of yellows behind your red rock that makes it hard for Team Carruthers to remove that rock, which is what you're looking for. I think it's too early to play the double, but unfortunately for Team Dropkin, that's going to under curl and it leaves both yellows in the forefoot, both still above the T line. And your red rock is a bit of a sitting duck over there. At any point in time, Reid can remove that if he so chooses.
And I was about to say, would he choose that in this situation? I think it's probably, you might be worried about it just enough that you probably have to play the hit. I think you could probably get away with guarding that center stone if you really had to. But I think with a 2 point lead in the score situation the way it is, I don't necessarily see a reason that Reid would have to take on that risk of leaving that red stone anywhere.
I agree. I don't think you need to leave it there. And I think that if you roll anywhere into the forfeit here, then it's another rock that Korey has to deal with. At some point you switch gears from trying not to give up two to maybe I can steal a point or two here. And I think that for Reid, he can maybe accomplish both those things with one shot rather than throwing the guard. He can roll this in and maybe even punch that shot stone a little bit behind that guard and sit right in the pocket. And they're kind of all three yellows in a line, and it makes it pretty hard for Korey to do much with it.
I think that was the call. Just try and roll really nowhere I see that you is a bad roll. Honestly, I think at this point with only 2 rocks to come for Korey, any yellow stones in the 4-foot, like you said, an extra one they have to move. So it'll be the hit here from Reid Carruthers. Sweeper's coming off it early, and now Derek's on it to try and get some curl. It might be pretty close to this corner guard. No, it comes up and does get that little bit of a flop in right on top. I think that's exactly where they wanted to, if you could place that rock anywhere, I think that's pretty close.
It's a pretty good result. If it rolled a little bit less, you'd leave Korey the triple and maybe with a little spin up behind the guard. Or you might leave him a tap and roll behind that corner guard on shot rock, and he wouldn't be shot, I don't think, but he might have been second. But now he would be probably third if he made that. So that's not going to help him very much. So looks like he's going to try to come off shot rock on the right hand side as we look at it, the high side, and roll into those 2 frozen yellows. At this point for Korey, probably looking like a force, just making sure that he has a reasonable shot for one.
Absolutely, a pretty good spot there for Reid, and no real options here. I think if you're Korey, other than just try and make as many yellows go away as you can and hopefully open up your chance to draw for your one, you might be able to come off here, make the double, and if you ever don't move that yellow stone on the left that's closer to the tee line, you kind of sit right there. Of course, Reid will just be able to come down and remove it, but does make it a little bit of a trickier shot for them.
Yeah, for Korey, I think would have liked to hit that first one a little bit thicker. Now, Team Carruthers just talking about where to place this rock.
I think if you could ever just bite the 8-foot right in front of that shot stone, then if they make the nose double, they won't be shot. I mean, it probably leaves just the straight draw to the button, and I'm sure Korey would be close on that. But even in that
Straight draw to the
case,
button's pretty ugly though. Like you're
yeah,
you're either going way out wide with either turn. You got to go around that corner guard with the in-turn, and if this is in a good spot, like you said, close, not quite biting the center line, then it's a real tough draw with that out turn. I think you could put this in a place where Korey might not be able to get one.
yeah. So you're thinking maybe just leave that yellow stone in the 4-foot, maybe a third or half exposed on the outside.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Just to like sort of cover the edge of the button there and leave him half of it on the outside of it on the right side as we look at it here. So I mean, it's pretty precise, but I think you could make it really you could make life pretty tough for Mr. Dropkin if you put this in a good spot. For Reid, again, he's not terribly concerned about giving up one, but just because he happens to be in such a good position here to maybe get that steal, this is a good chance to put some pressure onto Korey, and you could blow this game wide open if you stole 1 or 2 here.
Yeah, these are sort of the opportunities where I think maybe a lot of less experienced teams might be pretty happy with the fact that they basically have their force, which is I think what you would have wanted going into the end. But these are really the times where you want to sort of buckle down a little bit more and make sure you place these rocks exactly where you want them to try and give yourself the opportunity for those extra points. Now that one just, I think just slipping maybe that little bit of extra weight just over curled enough that there's this small hit and roll here for Korey for his one.
Yeah, I think it was over curling early, so they tried to bring it in deeper so that he had to make the hit and roll a little bit more precise. I think the original call was exactly what we said, but because it was already over curling pretty early on, they called an audible and just swept it for speed to make Korey make this a little bit better. But it's definitely there. Not easy, but makeable. Just get a little bit low on this with probably like a bumper kind of weight, and roll in. Even nose might be close, but a hair low, and he's guaranteed his single point. So a little bit of a slight miscue there from Reid.
So final rock coming here for Korey Dropkin. Trying to play a delicate hit. I think nose will do it, but if he can roll a little bit to the inside to score his single point, though, Sweepers on this the whole way to try and hold it. Looks like they'll be okay. He will get that small roll to the center, grab the edge of the button, score his single point. Reid Carruthers now with the 1-point lead will take a 2-1 advantage, and the hammer going into the fourth end of play. We'll take a quick commercial break and be back with Curling Stadium coverage of this C final in a minute. And welcome back to Leduc, Alberta, and Curling Stadium's coverage of the Alberta Curling Series major men's event. I'm Matthew Hall. I'm joined by Chelsea Carey in the broadcast booth. And definitely all signs say go here for Reid Carruthers. Having that point advantage and the hammer is huge. I just took a quick look at the numbers. I mean, you might think this is a close game, and it is by the scoreboard. But looking at the top men's teams in this situation, just 5 ends left and up one with the hammer, they win almost pretty close to 90% of the time from this situation. Um, Now, obviously, maybe these teams aren't quite in their top form that we'll see later on in the season. So that number is likely to be maybe a little bit lower, but just goes to show you what you were talking about earlier. I believe it was in the first end, how important hammer management is and how big of a hit it would be to Korey if he ever got forced after giving up that 2 to start.
Yeah, like I say, I think it's a common mistake to not realize how bad the situation is. It doesn't look like it's that lopsided a game. But again, it's like I say, it's full control. So we define control as either 2 points or 1 point plus the hammer. And so in this situation, Reid is in full control and he doesn't even need to go crazy here. All he needs to do is make sure he can score one and he stays in control. Two is a bonus and it puts him in a position where like he very seldom will lose that game. But it's yeah, certainly major advantage here right now for Team Carruthers and for Team Dropkin needing something to happen. A steal puts this back well within reach. Um, a single is okay, but anything more than that is not game over, but pretty close.
Absolutely. And we see a great setup there by Connor Negevin getting those 2 stones. Uh, Froze him behind those red guards, and I think we're in for a little bit of a treat here. I think we'll see Dropkin continue to try and utilize these center guards. Maybe those yellows are deceptively not that bad for Korey. If he can ever slip one around it, it'll be tricky for Reid to get at, but I wouldn't be surprised just to see Reid, unless he has access at the shot stone, likely just walk up and try and remove both or at least one of the guards, do you think?
I do think so, but I also agree with what you just said. That stagger's not what they would have wanted in a perfect world for Team Carruthers and Conor. They would have liked some separation there or a better angle. That is help. That's essentially another guard for Korey Dropkin. So it's not what Reid would have wanted for sure, and he's going to eventually have to deal with it. And it could put Korey in a position where maybe he gets a steal out of this, unless you see some sort of double combo. So in a perfect world here for Derek, would love to run this into those two yellows and kill one of them if you ever could.
And he will just get the top one, which is maybe a little bit concerning if you're Reid. Now, there's still plenty of time left in the end, but I think if any of the rocks are a quote unquote problem for you, it's probably that tighter guard, wouldn't you say?
I agree, yeah, for sure. The long guard is essentially just there to protect that tight guard. If Reid had access to peel just the tight one, he would do it for sure.
And now I may have just, and we don't have mics in the booth here from the ice, so we can't hear exactly what they're saying, but it looked like Korey initially tapped on those yellow rocks, like maybe they were coming down to a freeze. Now, looks like they might have changed up and just are replacing that high guard. To me personally, it feels maybe a little bit early to try and make another play in the rings, especially with how strong, with Jason Gunlickson coming up and how strong of a hitter he is. And there's our confirmation. It looks like they did change back to just throwing up that high guard.
Yeah, I think for sure that's the call. I'm actually surprised they considered anything else. I think you definitely need to, and before it there was a bit of an angle on it where Derek could have maybe made that double run into kind of the mess in the house there. Now if you line this up perfectly and just over the hog line, like if you could place it anywhere, you're probably just over the hog line in dead in line with that. It makes the double peel really difficult for Team Carruthers. So huge opportunity here for Team Dropkin, but they're going to need this to curl, I think. Bit of a tough call there. You see Tom Howell on the outside wanting to sweep that to make it curl, but it also was a little bit heavy. So you kind of can't do both. Do you wait for it to sit or do you try to get it to curl? But you can't. The further apart those are, the better. So that's one of those ones that's it's hard to know what is the right answer. What do you do? Do you sweep for that curl or do you just hope that it curls and dies? And he was right in there wanting to sweep it, but he didn't really do much to it with it being a little bit heavy and a little bit wide of the line that they hoped for.
And looking at the situation now for Reid, um, I know we said that that tighter guard probably is more of the problem rock, but I still think you likely have to take on the crack at the double. The problem is if you just continue to peel that tight guard, obviously Korey's just going to continue to replace it if you just continue to make single peels. I think the benefit of getting both of them, if it is that, well, it is available right now, but if you're able to make it, um, you can probably slash that yellow that's just a bit deeper, just outside the 4 foot into that red stone if you ever had to at the end. So getting rid of both these guards opens up sort of two ways that you can get at that shot stone.
I think because that double peel is so makeable for somebody of Derek's caliber, for sure you play it. If that rock was longer and more on center, then you might see just one. But yeah, I think that's the right call, and obviously the result would certainly support that being the right call.
Great result there from Derek. Gets both of the guards, and not only that, moves that stone off of the button. And I don't really see a. Again, if this is like the last end and you had to steal, you could probably consider trying to draw around those yellow rocks. But with the situation the way it is, do you think he's just trying to make a nose double? It might jam over at the side, or maybe do you just hit this bit less weight closer to nose and try and sort of stay frozen on one of those yellows?
Yeah, I'm not sure you can make the double. It looks to me like a jam. So my guess is that this is more a soft weight and try to stay frozen. So hit this just a hair on the high side. Both your shooter and the yellow rock that's staying will roll a little bit towards that center line side and just try to stay frozen on it and then hope you have a chance later. I mean, this is a play for a force in my mind versus for a steal, but given that you just saw the triple from Derek, that's probably the point in the end that you're at if you're Team Dropkin. Pretty good. That rolled a hair too far, but it's still on there. You still have a stagger, so not a bad result at all.
I think it's still pretty good. I think if you roll a rock further, you might be in some trouble because then
Yes.
there's really nowhere to hide, and there would be some pretty short run backs for Reid if you ever did try to hide somewhere. But good enough. You'll probably just see him hit this stone at the side. If he hits it on the nose, he sits too. And then I think this is kind of what they have to do. They don't necessarily need to push too hard. They'll get some opportunities, I think, strictly because, as we talked about, this is such a lopsided game position that Korey's the one who kind of has to push the envelope. So I think if you're Reid, you're okay with just maybe keeping things a little bit simpler, walking up, peeling guards, and really forcing Korey into the tough shots because he's going to have to call a lot of tough shots to get himself back in this, and B, he's going to have to make a lot of them as well. So any of those slight miscues, you'll get those opportunities if you're the Carruthers team.
Absolutely. Like I say, if you're Reid, your goal number one is to make sure you have a makeable shot for a single point. So you don't need to go crazy. You just need to make sure you have a shot for one. And right now he does. He's got the whole 4 foot. So he doesn't need to make, like you said, it's up to Korey to force the issue because he's the one trailing. So smart call by Reid there. Not surprising. We know how smart a skip he is and how long he's been around the game. So made the right call here. And so for Korey, having to balance the objectives of wanting to steal or force, but also not wanting to give up the game right now if you give up 2 or 3. So, you could draw around this. If you were later in the game, you'd probably see him just play the draw, but it looks like he's going to try a little hit and roll here, which accomplishes the same thing. It's just a harder shot to make. Pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's as good as you could do. You had to roll enough at least to get buried, so you were always going to be behind the T line. They're frozen, but obviously it's not going to drag that much I don't think, to make contact with the one on the button. But maybe an opportunity here. You hit a third of that red stone or half that red rock on the left-hand side as we look at the overhead. You could remove that red. Possibility to keep both yellows around, do you think?
Maybe, but I don't think you'll see them even try that. I think that you just hit this on the high side anywhere. If the back yellow sticks, it's a bonus. But you basically are just rolling over to the wing and saying, giving Korey the choice. Do you hit it and hope we don't make a double in the next 4 shots, or what, 4 shots I think left? Or do you throw a guard on this center line rock and play and take the risk of giving up 2?
Yeah, you're probably right. Just like I was saying just 2 shots ago, you don't need to take on that risk if you Reid, even if you obviously being forced is never really what you want with Hammer, but I think it's probably not even the worst situation in the world here if you Reid, and it actually gets rid of both stones. Almost made that
You
sneaky little
almost
run
did.
back. Yeah, but it sneaks by. So if you're Korey here, probably just guess it depends what you really want to go for. You could just split the rings and take the gimme force, or do you want to maybe be a little bit more aggressive here? I think the only thing you could maybe do is throw the tight guard, but Reid's so good at making those run backs and doubles, he's probably getting himself out of it. So do you agree with this? Just draw to the wing and try to just take on the force?
Yeah, I don't mind it. I think if it was me, I'd probably be throwing the guard because, if you make the guard close, then even if he makes the run back, you'll still have a guard to use, and you could go around it. But that's a little bit of a difference in men's versus women's curling too, as far as the percent chance of them making that run back is so high that if you put this even, then you're obviously playing for a straight force here, which realistically is probably the best result for you at this point in the end anyways. Even with the guard, you're likely not stealing, barring something very unforeseen. So obviously, and Korey's sort of been leaning this way since early in the end, so I'm not surprised that he's chosen this. But you better be pretty precise with this too, because you could pretty easily leave a double for Reid, and that would be the same result as the run back, right? So it could turn into a blank pretty quick here. You need this to be pretty close to dead even, and as far over as you can towards the edge of that 12 foot.
And you don't usually see a lot of these shots during a game, so it might be maybe a bit of a guess on the path too. It's probably broken down pretty well by the fourth end here, and you do see a lot of draws around corner guards, but usually not way out to the 12 foot. So it'll be up to the sweepers here. Looks like they like it. It should be fairly close, and now just make sure you get it right behind or actually maybe calling a plan B there. They knew they weren't actually going to get it far enough to make them even, so decide instead to leave it up a bit higher, and I think that's pretty good. There's no easy double. Of course, you could make the double and roll out, and that would probably be for the blank, but if you don't make it, Korey's just splitting the rings again. So looks like they're going to take on the opportunity to go for a 2 here, and or at least make things difficult on Korey, try and roll behind that red guard and or red rock he just threw. And even if you make it perfect and he makes the run back, you have a wide open draw to the 4-foot still to score your single.
Yeah, I think for Reid, keeping both options open here, you've already guaranteed yourself a very makeable shot for one, a pretty easy shot for one. So you may as well try this. If you get a roll out here, like if he chases it and rolls out, or if he plays the run back and doesn't stick them both, then you might get your blank out of it anyway. But worst case scenario, you have the whole 4-foot for one.
So first stone here for Reid Carruthers in fourth end. Trying to make this nice little hit and roll. They seem to like the line now, just getting a couple licks on at the end, get a little bit of extra curl. Jason Gunlickson working it over, and I think that's pretty good. Looks most at least 3/4 mostly buried, but opportunity here. Korey can just follow that down and play a freeze, and then again, it's still a fairly easy shot for Reid. It'll be a draw to the 4-foot. I think you expect him to make that 90% of the time, but put this in a good spot. It does choke down the rings a little bit.
My guess is that he might be trying to move this and sit too, but I don't know that for sure. You don't have to tap it very far, a couple feet, and then you stay buried and you sit two, and you make Reid decide if he goes to take on the double or just throws the draw for one. My guess is that he'll throw the draw if that's the case. So it does look like Korey was just playing a straight freeze there and made it pretty well. Would have liked it to curl maybe an inch, but because it didn't curl, it actually gives him a little bit more of the 4-foot and makes Reid's draw a little bit more precise. So for Reid Carruthers, no hesitation here, putting the broom down for the draw to the 4-foot. He'll need a good 3/4 of the 4-foot here. Like his chances, but for Korey, that's about all he could do to put some pressure on Reid.
And again, this is a shot you expect Reid to make. Of course, it isn't always made, but at this level, you'd expect him to be close here.
For sure. And with two sweepers the caliber of Connor Negevin and Derek Samagalski, that just gives you so much more confidence too. He doesn't have to be, he can throw a tight guard here and they'll put it in the 4-foot for him essentially. So just make sure make sure you're not heavy and get this close and give it to your sweepers, bring them into play because they're too good to be sitting on the bench for a shot like this.
So final stone here in the fourth end for Reid Carruthers, looking for the draw to the 4-foot to score his single point. Derek Samagalski and Connor Negevin sweeping. They seem to not be too worried. Now they're on it at the end just to make sure that it gets in there. And it does. Right onto the lid. He'll score his single point and take a 2-point lead. Scores now 3-1 for Reid Carruthers, but Korey Dropkin will have the hammer and the opportunity to come back as we move into the back half of this game. We'll take a quick break and we'll see you all in a couple minutes. And welcome back to Leduc, Alberta, the Curling Stadium Alberta Curling Series Men's Major. We resume play here going into the back half, fifth end. Reid Carruthers with a 3-1 lead over Korey Dropkin. Korey Dropkin now with the hammer after Reid made a nice draw to the button to score his single point last end. I'm Matthew Hall, joined by Chelsea Carey in the broadcast booth, and we'll be bringing you all the action from this game for tonight. There is one other game going on that is between Tanner Horgan and Rylan Kleider in the other C final. They are currently also in the fifth end of play. Horgan with a 2-1 lead and Kleider with the hammer. So another close game over there.
Big steal of one for Horgan in the fourth end. That game got off to a fairly defensive start. We saw them blank the first end, and then Tanner Horgan with the blank opportunity in the second end actually flashed it and gave up a steal, and then was forced in three, but stole one in four. So back in control over there. Couple of good games here.
And I'm also keeping an eye on, there is one other event going on in Alberta, and Chelsea was just playing in it earlier this weekend. But their final is going on right now between Team Jennifer Jones and Team Rachel Homan. Jones opened up with a steal of 2 to start that game, and Rachel came back with a single. So they're early on, and another close game there. That Jones team is quite an interesting one. Of course, everyone back home will likely know them as Team Zacharias from last year, the defending Manitoba champions. And with Jennifer stepping away from her team, they brought her on, and I think that's going to be a great learning opportunity for them. Of course, Chelsea, did you play against either of those teams this weekend, or what were you seeing from them?
We didn't. They were in a different pool than us, but yeah, I mean, we saw them. We were all in Martinsville last weekend for an event as well. So they're moving around. They're working a full 5-player team. They're changing with pretty much every game who's in the lineup and who's sitting out. Although I think there's only 4 of them there this weekend, so it's been a little bit more steady. But yeah, very interesting for sure. Obviously, Team Zacharias having a ton of success on the junior stage and early in their women's careers, and then joining forces with one of the most decorated, if not the most decorated, women's curler in history with Jennifer. So it'll be really interesting to see how that goes. I think obviously a great learning opportunity for um, very young, talented players in Team Zacharias. And Jen has a history of winning regardless of who she has on her team. She's changed a few times and always had success. So definitely a team to look out for.
And you see that a lot where, some younger up and coming player ends up playing with sort of the veteran, I guess might be the best way to put it. Someone with a lot more experience who's won quite a bit. I mean, uh, the other example would be someone like Tyler Tardy moving to play with Kevin Cooey this year. Thinking back in the day, I remember when John Epping played with Wayne Madaw when he was younger in his men's career. And then after that, Matt Cam, I believe, foregoed his final year of juniors to play men's with John Epping. So it's something that you see a lot. And as sort of the generations per se roll over, you sometimes see a lot of those older, more experienced players taking on that younger star under their wing, and they learn a lot from it. And those players, I would say, tend to go on to have very good careers after that.
Definitely. I mean, you saw it with Caitlin Laws playing with Kathy King for a year, and then with Jennifer for a long time, obviously, and what she's been able to do in mixed doubles and women's and everything, and now going back to skipping and starting her own team. It's for sure. I mean, I did it out of juniors. I played a couple of years of third for Barb Spencer, who was one of the best skips in Manitoba, and had that experience. And it was an opportunity for me to learn the women's game is just a little bit different than the junior game is. So it's a smart move, I think, in a lot of cases to do that. It also has to do a little bit with sponsorship money and being established and having that support from those companies. And the reality of the situation is that your season is very expensive. So being able to have that and maybe be able to be paid a little bit by that kind of money is a factor as well, especially for young people. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of things about it that make a lot of sense on both sides. I think that for the veterans, sometimes it can be a little bit of a boost. It's a pick me up. It's seeing somebody that's excited again, because you can lose that a little bit with the grind and the sort of day in day out of it. You forget about your love for the game a little bit sometimes, and so having somebody like that can kind of boost your it can kind of get you excited again, and you've seen that effect from the other side. So I think it's a great situation for both players or both parties in that kind of a team dynamic, potentially. But again, it's always a new dynamic, and you see how the learning curve goes. It could work, it could not. But in the case of Team Jones, so far it seems to be working pretty well.
Yeah, and I'm sure that Zacharias team will be one that will be. I just get this feeling we'll be watching them for a long, long time. I think, as you said, already quite a bit of success before bringing Jennifer on, and I mean, there's so much that I think they could learn from someone with that much experience that it'll just only end up making them better at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%. And you're definitely going to be seeing them around for a long time. I actually am lucky enough as well to we have their fifth player, Rachel Erickson, as part of our team. So same idea. She's really young and really talented, and so excited about being able to play in these events and learn and grow and all those things. And it's nice for some of the more veteran players to have that energy and that presence of this younger player who just wants these things so badly and is so excited, because we all were that player at some point in our lives, but it's easy to lose sight of that.
So taking a quick look at this end here, I almost want to say advantage Dropkin with having that stone behind the corner guards, and we saw Derek Samagalski, a bit of a unconventional miss by him, slipping that little bit deep to the back of the 12 foot, and that sort of really gave Korey the free opportunity to set things up this end. Has that one frozen top of the 4 foot. It is still shot stone Reid, but there might be some red flags going off in Reid's head if he's not careful here. Korey's going to have the opportunity to remove that yellow stone and at least generate a 2, maybe more, if Reid isn't careful.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's one of those situations where you look at it and say, well, yellow's shot, biting the button, they're in great spot, but they're actually in a huge amount of trouble. And while what just happened might look like a miss, it's not really, because now Korey is second, third, and fourth, and that freeze is so queued up that anything he runs in there is going to kill that yellow rock easily. So not panic for Reid, but certainly not comfortable at all. You're getting pretty worried. Life's getting a little scary for Team Carruthers right now.
Absolutely. And I mean, just looking at this setup here, you can probably make that double. I think that one red stone that just came in top 12 is more or less open around that guard. You could probably make the nose double, but then the question is, your shooter's not really going to go anywhere. And at any point, Dropkin can come down and play the hit on the shot stone and sit too. Not saying that he would necessarily do that right away, but even if you make the double, you're still not out of the woods.
I agree. I think what the double does for you is probably makes it only 2 and not more. So you really want to make this double for Reid, but it does probably mean that worst case scenario you're tied. And
Ends up going over the
not
top, sort of jamming it looked like.
yeah, not a little thinner than they wanted, not quite what they had in mind. So now again, like, you've got a big end in play for Korey here. This could very easily turn into a 3.
And yeah, now the big question I think is, when do you decide to cash everything? And I mean, of course, you could hit that um, frozen combination in the middle and roll behind the corner and set 3. You might leave a little double back for Reid, though, if you do that. Do you think you necessarily have to make this play right now? And it looks like Andrew's going to come down and have a talk to Korey about it. He might have a different idea.
I was going to ask you the same thing, Matt, actually. Like, to me, I would be looking at the out-turn freeze through that hole, right onto that red yellow combination, and not kill the right now. That yellow rock is your friend. It's helping you. So I'm not sure that you need to do it this soon, because it just gives them more chances at a double.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, what's the worst thing that's ever going to happen if you don't hit it right now? Like, the only thing you could possibly be worried about is if Reid decides to switch gears and, I don't know, like, guard it, I guess. But with there's so much stuff to run in that you probably still have a really good chance at your 2. So I'd be looking at some kind of set up again. Like you said, freeze. The option could be there, or they could probably be talked into maybe even just drawing around one of the corners if you put it in a good spot where there's no double. Um, Definitely some options here. It looks like they have decided to make a play on it, though.
I guess this what maybe is factoring into their decision here is that yellow rock, which doesn't seem like it should be a factor on the very far left of the
Mm.
house as I look at it here. So if you roll over towards that, then any double that they play will jam on that rock potentially. So I'm wondering if that's maybe a factor, because other than that, I'm a little bit surprised by this call. But again, for Korey too, like you're pretty happy with a two given the way this game's gone. So this is the way to not guarantee, but to be a little bit safer about getting your 2 points. I actually think that's a pretty good result.
Yeah, I think it does the job. The best part of it is it kept a good angle on it where I don't even think Jason Gunlickson could throw it that hard if you're trying to hit it on the nose to get it out. But so really the only chance for a double would be to run back that yellow rock on the center line. But even then, that red might jam over on the side and you're taking on a lot of risk. So I
Yeah,
think if
you're
you read
potentially
your,
bringing four into play. I don't think you
yeah,
ever. I think you just kill like. And what the only bad news about what you just said, I think the angle is as good as it could have been. If you roll part way to what you were trying, it would have been a disaster because then they make the double and potentially sit buried behind that center line rock. But the only bad news about this is that if Reid can get right to the nose here, it's
hmm
now all of a sudden the momentum shifts completely. And how do you preserve your two? Because he's going to have a pretty easy shot to kill that shot stone.
Yeah, I mean, one shot ago we were talking about it was red frozen onto yellow, and we talked about why that was so good for Korey, and
Right.
now Reid has the opportunity to switch it around. If he stays on the nose here, now it's yellow frozen to red, and great opportunity for him to sort of at least cut down all those other reds that are sitting around different parts of the rings.
Looks pretty close. Oh, that's a great shot.
Yeah, and even like just looking at it, how would you get in for a second point if this was Korey's last? You could probably,
Could draw to this wing, I think.
yeah. Do you
I
think
think,
there's probably space you if you had to? Yeah, you I guess that yellow is just fully in the 8 foot, so you could draw there and you just need to get full 8 to score your second point.
yeah, I think the wing is probably the easiest one. I'm not sure. It depends how much it's curling. If the intern draw to the center is there to get past that wide red guard, it looks really tight to me.
Hmm.
But this, it looks like Korey's going to throw this draw to the wing on his first one, and then in theory, Reid chases one or the other, and he could either play the exact same shot or chase the middle, depending on where Reid rolls or where he ends up.
And best spot here is probably full 8, maybe rock or two above the T line if you can.
Yeah, I think so. You might. I actually don't mind it deep because he might like he could. I don't think he would, but he could hit and roll if you leave it high,
Hmm.
and then you might not be able to score, or you might have to make a double for one. I think like I don't see any harm in going back eight as long as you're sitting two.
Yeah, and uh,
But you're not going
yeah,
to
I
line up.
think
I
that's
don't
right.
think you can drag it enough, right? So I don't think that
No,
there's
yeah.
ever a concern about a combo.
Even if he makes the hit and roll in, you'd have options. I know you could come in off those red rocks over at the side, but that's probably not the ideal situation if you're Korey. So I think you're right.
No, I think you just go full eight anywhere, which like so to me in a perfect world, just so that he never throws a hit and roll, which I don't think he would, but um just go T line back, just back sort of back four depth, but just full eight over there. And then no matter what Reid does, you should have a shot for two.
Yeah, it looks like they're having some extra discussion about this though.
They're trying to set up a potential three, I think is what they're looking at
Mhm.
because they're still third shot over there. So they're looking at maybe unlocking this freeze. So get slightly to the inside, to the center line side of this yellow, and tap that red rock a couple feet. And then, depending what Reid does, if he were to miss a shot, then they might have like essentially a nose hit for three or four.
Mhm.
And there's not a lot of risk in this, really. I don't mind this call.
Well, yeah, I mean, even if you like the worst thing you might be able to do is if you tap it a little bit and you keep the red yellow angle so the yellow would just go back into the red. But even if that was the case, I mean, you're always going to have something you would think on your last stone for
I think
two.
so. I think it's hard to not. if you make this like even if you hit it a little bit high, you hopefully would still have something for a multiple score. And if you're anywhere close, then you're bringing more than 2 into play. If you draw to the open side, it's only ever 2.
Yeah, this is the only way you bring that other red stone into play over
For
on the other
sure.
side of the 12-foot. Although I don't know if
Uh-oh.
this maybe grabbed something, but they started to panic on it. They rubbed that tight yellow guard. Is the shooter going to roll? Not quite enough. Although if Reid didn't throw here, there might be a double. But of course, he has a rock in hand, so
Yeah, I think the double's probably there, but it's about not to be
yeah,
if Reid has anything to say about it.
probably just hit this yellow. Probably, well, I mean, knows you're probably okay. I think it would be difficult to leave a triple, but probably want to roll somewhere to make sure you don't leave anything for them.
I actually think your chances of leaving a triple on the nose are like I think you're safer nosing it than rolling because it's going to jam on that red, won't it?
hmm I think so. As long as you're anywhere high side,
Yeah, just
yeah,
don't
what
get
you,
to the center line side and
yeah,
then you're but even if you do get to the center line side, then it's hard to kill the middle one. I think what your danger of a triple is rolling underneath your other yellow
hmm
where you've unlocked that whole side now and you can play some sort of combo and come off onto the where those 2 frozen rocks are now.
right. So the decision's made here by Reid. Going to play ahead, and it looks like they're I don't. Maybe he was just telling Reid where he didn't want to end up there, but where Jason just sort of tapped his rock over on the side there. That's what you were talking about. I think that's the
Mhm.
spot that leaves the triple. So probably just getting that last word to let them know where they don't want to end up.
Right, anywhere but there, essentially,
Yeah.
is I would guess what he was saying because that's, to me, looks like the only real trouble is if you're over there somewhere.
Of course, in my history, if I say put this rock anywhere but here, it's going to end up right there. So
Yeah, that's often a dangerous thing to say, but I'm guessing based on where he put his broom that that's what he was saying. Now, we'll see if that, is a jinx or not, but seems to me that that's the only place you don't wanna be.
so final stone here in the fifth M by Reid Carruthers. Still one to come from Korey Dropkin. This one well tight early. Is he going to get anything?
I wonder if there's something going on in this spot. That's where Corey's did it too, and they weren't worried about it early. And then it went crazy. So I wonder if there's maybe a bit of a ridge there or a flat spot or something, because that's 2 now that we've seen just go totally crazy there. So now we're gonna find out if the double's here. The only potential issue with this double is hitting the first one thin. You might jam it on the other side there to hit it thin enough to not hit that red that it's frozen to. Like, I think
Yeah,
you could clear them all. I think you could get 2 out of it for sure. I'm just not sure it's like it looks like it might be there for 4, and I don't think
yeah.
it is.
I think it is if you hit it perfectly. You can't roll directly into the yellow because I think you kind of have to roll in such a way to push that yellow if there's a hole between those two reds through there. If you kind of come over the top, you probably don't have enough weight to get rid of it. And you're right, if you end up hitting it a bit thin into the yellow, it could always touch the back side of that red in the 12-foot and not go out. Um,
I'm just
I
worried about hitting it thin enough jamming, but I think it probably hits that side red and goes out of the house. But I think
Oh, on the right side, you mean?
yeah, on the right
Yeah.
side, because you have to
Okay.
hit
Yeah.
this so thin to make it that I think it maybe is only for 3, but I think it might be for 3 if it goes through this hole between the reds, which it's tough to do, but it looks like it's maybe possible. I mean, you gotta try it if you're Corey with the score being what
Yeah.
it is. Hopefully you get at least 2 out of it, and if any more than that is a bonus.
Yeah. Whether it's for 2 or 3 or 4, I think you're pretty happy with the situation.
Exactly, yeah.
Um,
I don't think it's for 4. I think it's for 3 max, but, because I say that, he'll make it for 4.
well, we won't have to wait very long to see if he makes it. Final stone, Korey Dropkin in the hack. Releases, and now it's up to Tom Howell and Mark Fenner. Sweeping this early,
Well, that's
definitely.
gonna overcurl on him a little bit.
Like I was saying, just hits that first one a little bit thick, rolls over the top, and just doesn't have enough wait to get rid of that second yellow stone. So big opportunity missed there if you're Korey Dropkin. Only walks away with a single point, and I think a sigh of relief if you're Reid Carruthers. He'll take a 1-point lead, now up 3-2 with 3 ends to go. We're going to take a quick commercial break. When we get back, we'll go into the last third of this game, and Reid Carruthers with the advantage. And welcome back to Leduc, Alberta, and Curling Stadium's coverage of the Alberta Curling Series Men's Major. My name is Matthew Hull. Joining me in the booth is Chelsea Carey, bringing you all the action from the C-side finals today. And just, there's no real nice way to put it. Just a big missed opportunity there for Korey Dropkin at the end of that last end.
Well, and it was a little bit of a I don't want it, you take it situation because
Yeah.
Corey had a good chance, and then I was speculating that there might be a little bit of a spot in the ice because his took off when they weren't worried about it and hit a guard, and then Reed's did the same thing and he flashed it on the inside, gave Corey the opportunity back, and then Corey's last shot for him unfortunately just over curled. Could have been for 3 or 4, and should have certainly been for 2 if he hit it any thinner, and unfortunately just curled a little bit too much for him and only gets the single point. So back to full advantage for Reed, and we're getting late in the game now. So this 1-point deficit without the hammer is starting to become more and more concerning for Korey Dropkin.
And I was just about to say, it's the same situation as it was 2 ends ago, just being down 1 without the hammer. But with 2 fewer ends left to play, it's an even bigger advantage um, for Reed. I mean, just looking at the numbers, I think it's about 7% at the highest level from this situation for Korey to come back and win this game. And I was actually just taking a look over at it's amazing the world that we live in now. There's actually live odds on these curling games that you can get at certain books, and I just sort of took a look over at Cool Bet just because I was curious, and they have Korey Dropkin at about 12-1 to win this game right now. So um, are you familiar at all with it's a fairly new thing, but I I'll be completely transparent. I work for a sports book. I'm an odds maker. I do a lot of work on curling. Have you ever um, bet on curling or taken a look at it in the past?
Yes, I have. I don't do a lot of it. I'm not a big gambler, but I'm relatively familiar with how it works. And I've bet on the Briar and Men's Worlds and things in the past occasionally. It's kind of fun to play along, and as a curler, it's kind of fun sometimes to look at the odds and think, man, I wouldn't have given that team that good of odds, or those kinds of things. So it's interesting. It's a fun new twist.
Well, if you ever have that thought again, feel free to send me a message. I'm sure I'd appreciate the what people think my odds are at. But yeah, and it's an entirely new world, and I know there's a lot of people out there. I sort of have my thumb on it just because it's what I do for my career. But I know there's a lot of people necessarily worried about it too, and I think rightfully concerned. I think anytime the wager or gambling aspect comes up, there's always sort of that thought in the back of your head of, well, is everything happening fairly? I know that we take great care to make sure that games are still played in a fair manner. We have plenty of regulations. We don't allow people to wager on any events that they're specifically involved in. So sorry, Chelsea, if you were looking to bet on the your Alberta event this weekend, I wouldn't have let it happen. But I think it's sort of a new opportunity, and I think it's really exciting as long as it can be done properly, and we continue to be as diligent as we can. It's an part of entertainment now with most sports, and it opens up the sport to a largely new demographic that I think might not be interested in curling otherwise. When we look at sort of the younger demographic, people my age or even younger, it may get them interested in the sport. And as long as we can do it properly and stay on top of things, uh, I think we can sort of quell those sort of fears a little bit. But
Yeah, I think it's a fair fear. I understand the fear for sure, but I think that there's, and I mean, at the end of the day, is it possible? Absolutely. But to me, with curlers, we have a great group of people that are. I mean, you're sort of born and raised on etiquette. There's a lot of etiquette involved
mhm,
in curling. There's a lot of self regulation. For the most part, they leave us alone and let us do it ourselves, as far as measurements, as far as all that stuff, right? So I think of as a group of people, it should be less concerning for us, but I understand it. But yeah, there's, I mean, we have to take a course before we go to this points bet invitational that Curling Canada is putting on in a week and a half now. We have to take a course on match fixing and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they're doing a pretty good job of making sure. And yeah, I mean, I don't bet on I bet on the men's events. I don't bet on my own events ever
mhm.
because that's not obviously not what you should be doing. And I think that in general, curlers know that. And I also don't know that that a whole bunch of us are huge gamblers where we're putting big stakes on it. But yeah, I fully understand the concern, but I also think overall it's good for the game. So, like to your point with attracting new audiences and things. So, I think that it's important for curling to grow as a sport, and we just need to do what we can to make sure that it's fair and equitable. And I think that steps are being taken in that direction. Certainly, in my experience, as far as from our side, what we're being sort of told about and warned about, and the courses that we have to take and things are all to do with that. So, I think we're in a pretty good spot, and hopefully we don't have any issues because I think overall we're a pretty honest group of people. But we'll we'll kind of go forward and see how it goes. But I think that it's in a pretty good place, and I think that overall it's a great thing for the game.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, we will see a lot more where um, I think it's always been a great aspect of the sport that it's sort of left up to the players and a lot of things. But I think we will see, especially with this advent of sports betting becoming as big as it is. I mean, you can't watch a Jays game anymore without like a inning by inning update of what the odds are during the commercials. So I think and I think you'll see a lot more regulations and like these courses that you guys have to take, or I think there will be something written in stone very soon, if it's not already, in the Curling Canada Charter or World Curling Charter. Um, and I think as long as we're diligent, we do what we need to do, and we continue to educate and make sure that everyone's staying on top of it. I think it is a good thing for the sport, and it expands who's interested. I mean, at the end of the day, it can get more money in the sport. It can lead to sponsorships, as
Oh, and it
we've
already
already seen
has.
many.
It already
Yeah.
has. Yeah, we've seen that. I mean, you see PointsBet sponsoring this event. You see CoolBet sponsoring several teams. It's become a big thing already. And I mean, the reality of the situation is that we need more money. We need more sponsorship money. So, any more money that we can get in the sport is a good thing. And you manage the details. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's been a big deal in a lot of sports for a long time. It's relatively new to Canada and relatively new to curling, but it's not new. and they've figured out ways to do it and ways to regulate it. And yes, there's scandals and you can watch documentaries about it. I have watched documentaries about it,
Mhm.
but for the most part, it works fine and it's just fine.
Yeah, and obviously when a scandal does happen, it's huge. It's usually huge news, especially at the professional level, but it is very few and far between,
Yeah.
and it's something that we do our absolute best to regulate on a day-to-day basis. It's part of my daily job when I sit there. That's basically what most of my job is just watching bets come in and keeping an eye out for responsible gaming and things like that. Um, as we move to this end, a bit of an opportunity here for Dropkin. Reid hasn't been able to get these guards moving out of the way. Now he does have one in the forefoot, but sitting behind the teal line, I'm sure Korey's just counting on his fingers until he has the opportunity to draw down to that.
Yeah, the challenge for Reed is that it's hard to tell because we don't have that wide yellow guard in the shot on the overhead, but the intern draw might not be there, or it might be really tough for him to come in at the end of the end. So wanting to move those guards, but hasn't had any luck just yet. So for Korey, even if you just steal one here, it's pretty good because then again, like I said, if you're tied after 6, then somebody scores 1 in 7. And for Korey Dropkin to be either one up or one down coming home, given how this game has gone, would be a huge win.
Hmm.
So he's loving life if he can steal one here right now. So he's for sure licking his chops a little bit with the current situation.
And on skips first, you kind of have to play into the forefoot now, do you think?
That looks like ice for a guard to me, but oh
The
yeah,
only worry I think
yeah.
is
No,
if you
you
throw
have.
up,
You probably have to. Yeah, you probably have
yeah,
to. You're right.
if you throw up another guard, I think Reed's just going to
He's
ignore
probably
it
not gonna.
and
Yeah,
just go around himself. So
this is a tough draw through this hole, but I think it. I think it's. I mean, they obviously think it's possible. They're playing it. So if he can make it, then Reed's in not in trouble, but it's going to be maybe tough not to give up a steal. Sweepers look like they like it.
it's a big call by Andrew Stapera to make sure you get by this tight guard, and they do. Now just get it far enough, put it in a good spot. Doesn't,
Oh, they lost it.
yeah, it looked like,
He-
did it grind in right at the end there or something?
Well, I was not sure if they were off it to get it by the corner guard. We couldn't really tell. I wondered if that's why, or else maybe the ice is just getting a little bit slow on them at this point in the game. And they were a little bit surprised by how that came down because that was the line. Everything was perfect. If that goes another foot and a half, then it's exactly what we said. Corey's sitting one and he's looking like he could steal.
And now Reed still has to be careful though. If he's gonna play this double, if you ever don't miss it, don't make it, just go by that one top four. That yellow is now a catcher still for those red guards.
Looks
You
like he's
think you
just
see
gonna
him just
peel
peel
the
it?
center one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which makes some sense. If you peel that middle one, it's hard for Corey to get to shot rock, and it's if he makes a little run back, it's gonna be pretty wide open for Reed, and it's a tough like it's fairly thin. You're probably losing the shooter. So I think this is probably a smart call given the scoreboard to just peel this center rock by
Yeah.
itself. Because like you said, I mean, if you try to the double peel, that could very easily go into the pile there and cause you some problems.
Yeah, and I think if you peel this, like what does drop can do? The draw looks difficult. I don't really know if there's a hole there to just draw straight to the red, so might have to make like an angle tap on the one you just threw,
Right.
and you could make it perfect to sit frozen, but obviously that's extremely difficult. And if you ever don't make it perfect, you probably leave a shot for two for Reed.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna play that, you might play it with some weight and try to kill the yellow.
Just get rid of it. Yeah.
I think if the hole is there, then you play the hole, but I'm not sure that it is. So looks like they're talking about the problem. I mean, if you make the tap to a freeze, it's really good because I don't think Reed could get inside it. And I think again he would have to draw basically the pin
Yeah, I think
to score.
if you knew you were going to make whatever you call, that's probably the best make on the ice, but as you said, extremely difficult.
Yeah, I agree, but I think yeah, so you're trying to sort of weigh the pros and cons here. What for sure what you have to do obviously is sit shot. So
Mhm.
it's just a matter of how you sit shot and the best way to make Reed miss, essentially, I think is where the discussion is going to be for Team Dropkin right now. You could easily play just a nose tap, but then the problem is you leave him a pretty easy double for 2, and I don't like your chances of him missing that. So you probably have to play it onto that shot rock somehow. It's a matter of how much weight, whether you're trying to kill the yellow and where your shooter rolls.
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like if you run it into that yellow to jam it there on the yellow, your shooter's probably rolling out of the way. It would just be a fairly easy open hit for Reid. Um, I mean, you could, I guess, maybe try and hit it the redstone a little bit thicker so the shooter doesn't roll as far, and your other redstone after hitting the yellow would also roll back to the center, and you might sit 2 that way. But I mean, at that point, you're picking hairs, and
I think that angle's pretty tough. I think if
yeah.
to me, if I'm gonna play it with weight, I'm gonna play it to try to stuff it behind that guard almost. So,
Mhm.
like, you almost wanna hit this so thin that it crosses that yellow a tiny bit so that it's buried and moves the yellow back a little bit and sits buried behind that corner guard. You can probably still be full 4 foot. You can for sure still be full 4 foot, and
Mhm.
then make Reid make the draw, which he'll probably make, but then at least it's only 2 points that you're down. If you do anything else, you're probably giving him a shot for 3. So risky, but there's no low risk shot here for Korey. So you have to make something. Unfortunately for them in the scoreboard situation that they're in and the end situation that they're in, no matter what you call, you're going to have to make it, or else you're going to give up 2.
Absolutely. And where that broom came down, it doesn't look like he's going to be throwing a whole lot of weight. Looks pretty close to what they took for the draw. So likely just trying to make some kind of a tap here. They look like they don't hate the weight, but really need to go here to get it to curl. You absolutely have to make contact at the very least.
No, it doesn't move it quite far enough. Mark Fenner was on that to carve it the whole way down the sheet and couldn't quite get it to go. Weight seemed pretty close to what he would have been calling, just a little bit straighter for them today. And it seems like they're sometimes kind of struggling to pick that up. And then a few tricky spots where we saw those either picks or a flat spot or something, where Korey and Reid both over curled. So looks like they're just fighting the ice a tiny bit here, which, coincidentally always seems to happen when you're trailing in a game.
And I mean, it does move that red into a little bit of a tricky spot. This isn't an easy shot for 2, but I don't think Reid's going to be really far enough off to that you're worried about tapping them in for shot.
No,
So,
that's the only concern. So, like, relatively risk-free here as long as you don't miss this tight, which based on Corey's tracking the way it did, there's not a ton of curl, so should be manageable line-wise for Reid. So, just get the weight close and let the sweepers do the rest. If you know you're gonna be on the red, you just stop sweeping it and hopefully it doesn't tap it in. I think he's gonna be close here. Reid's a really good touch player, so this has got his name written all over it to some degree.
yeah, and I'm sure he knows even if you just take way too much ice and you end up wrecking on that yellow guard, at least you still always get your 1 in that
Yeah,
case.
exactly.
And it
That's a great
takes,
point. You err on the side of wrecking on that yellow guard. Like, throw this wide if anything. If you wreck on it, you're guaranteed a single. It's nice because he's guaranteed a single already, so he doesn't have to take a lot of risk.
and now they're
Oh,
trying.
we're trying to carve it here, and he's gonna do exact commentator's curse again. He's gonna do exactly what we just said.
All right.
But that's a smart miss, so
Absolutely. So Reid gets his single point. He takes a 4-2 lead with just 2 ends remaining. Korey Dropkin running out of time here in this game. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll rejoin at the start of the 7th end. Welcome back to Leduc, Alberta, the Curling Stadium Alberta Curling Series Men's Major. My name is Matthew Hull. Joining me in the broadcast booth is Chelsea Carey, and we'll be bringing you all the action from the last two ends of play here in these C finals. Two games happening, both fighting for the last two spots into the playoffs. On the other sheet, Tanner Horgan with a 4-2 lead in the hammer over Rylan Kleider with two ends left to play. You can watch that sheet as well as all the games for the remainder of this weekend through Curling Stadium on the Curling Zone YouTube page. You can also get links to the games on Curling Zone itself. And just looking back at that last end, Chelsea, not really, unfortunately, just maybe a bit of a missed opportunity for Reid. I'm sure he would have liked to get two and really put a clamp down on this game, but with the situation the way it is, I'm sure he's happy still up to without hammer here in 7. And we see here the attempt by the Dropkin lead likely was maybe attempting to play the stone in the rings. Unfortunately, just over curls or was maybe just trying to tick that guard over into two corner guards. Regardless, bit of an over curl taps them into the rings. And unfortunately, I think the biggest issue with that shot is that they stayed there as a center guard. I mean, it is their color now, but I'm sure they're not too happy with that result.
No, definitely not. It's my guess is that they were trying to play the. I mean, it's an either or, but probably trying to play the tick and roll to another corner. But yeah, staying as a center guard is not great. It's not awful. Guards are your friend at this point if you're Korey Dropkin, but preferably not right on the center line if you could help it.
And I was during the break there, I was just looking through some of the chat. There's a live chat on the game on YouTube if you're watching. And somebody asked, and I'm interested in maybe getting your opinion on this. They asked, do you prefer the triple elimination to a round robin format? And I know me personally, I always sort of preferred the triple. I liked, you still always got your 3 games, which I think is a good number, but you were never really playing those games where both teams are sort of out of the event and you're just sort of going through the motions being out there. But I'm curious for your perspective. Obviously, you've had a lot of success at both formats over the years. Obviously, 2-time Scotties champion. That's always been a round robin. I know you won the Canadian Open back in 2018, I believe, the Grand Slam. I can't remember if that was a triple at that time, but obviously you have plenty of experience with both formats. Does it make a difference to someone playing at the top level? Do you prepare for the event differently? What are from your perspective, like what's the difference there between those two kinds of play?
You did your research. Yes, it was 2018, and yes, it was a triple at
Yes.
that point
Yeah.
in time. Well done. I personally like the triple because I hate the meaningless games. So it's nice to be able to plan, especially with a long event, with a Scotties or Briar where it's 10 days. It's nice to kind of know in advance when you're playing, and we have a break here, and we have this draw off, and that kind of thing. But I personally like the triple better. Early in the season, there's a lot of round robins just because teams want the games then, even if they
Hmm.
are meaningless, because you're trying to figure out a new team and whatever, and you're trying to shake the rust off and stuff. But my personal preference is for a triple, but I know there's a lot of top players who would tell you they hate the triple. So it's very personal as far as what your preference is. I do like the triple.
Okay, and I know I'm the same way. I hate playing those games where both teams have had a bad weekend and then you're both 0-3. You're already sort of out in a round robin, and sometimes later on in the season you wonder why you're out there, kind of thing. But it is always, especially when you get up to the big events like the national championships. I was always a bit of a purist. I like the old style of the Brier and the Scotties where you had to play everyone, and I know that's not the case anymore with all the added teams, and it's just not sort of possible. And we do have the pool format, but I'm still a little bit old school where I like that you have to play everyone, you have to beat everyone if you want to end up at the top at the nationals and the world championships. But seem to be straying, maybe moving away from that in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like that better too. I have never seen the pools be even close to even so far in the way that they're currently doing it. But if you're going to include all those teams, even if you take out wild card, but you can't, if you're going to have two pools, you need one wild card team to even them out. Um, it's already a maximum length with the way it
Hmm.
is. So you can't add any time to it. So there's really no other option if you're going to include every team the way that they've been doing it. So I think it's the best we can do right now, given those parameters. But I liked the old way where you played everybody. I'm with you on that one. I do like wild card. I like the addition of wild card. I think that the way the game is moving, that makes a lot of sense to me. But I miss the old full versus the two pools where you don't even know. I see teams in the playoffs and I'm like, oh, you're in this. Like I
Yeah.
forgot you on your problem because you haven't seen them all week. So it's definitely a very different feel than the old way. Um, and I've played in it both ways. And I'm an old school, person that way too, I suppose. But I don't know that there's a better option given the parameters of including every province and territory, which I totally see. I see why they're doing that. And if that's the case, then I'm not sure there's another way to do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, the only other way which they tried a couple years ago was the relegation format, but I wasn't really a fan of that. It
No,
didn't
then you're
really.
not really including every province. So like
Yeah.
you're giving them a chance, but then you're penalizing teams for not. Yeah, I don't know. Like if you're looking at the Brier and the Scotties as what it is right now, which is basically an inclusive event of every province and territory, then they should be included for the whole event.
Hmm.
So I don't, I understand relegation. I know it works okay on the world stage with Europeans and stuff, and an A and B championship and the play in and all that. But um, I think essentially it's what it's lacking right now a little bit is identity. Are we trying to pick our best rep, or are we trying to have this event the way it's been done for a million years? And that's essentially what is being wrestled with right now, I think. And if it's going to be an inclusive event, then I think you have to include them for the whole time, not just give them two games on green ice to or try to quote unquote earn their way in. I think that's a bit of a tough road.
Yeah, I mean, you never want to fly somebody out just to play one or two games. They're there for 2 days and then you send them home, kind of thing. I don't think that's really the answer that we're looking for. But as I say that, I'm thinking ahead to a couple weeks from now with the Curling Canada Invitational event, which you're in, and it's, I think, really the first event. Maybe, well, I guess if you think back to the old skins games they used to do, those were single knockouts as well. But I mean, 16 teams are going to be playing in it, and 8 of them will be out after one game. Now, I'm sure you are planning on, making it far in that event, but do you have anything in the back of your mind if things don't go well? Are you guys going to stay out there? Maybe take a bit of a vacation on the East Coast while you're there?
Yeah, you know what? I heard that there's an event running in a curling club for the teams that lose the first game, but we have
Okay.
some practices booked. So regardless of whether we're still in or not, we're gonna spend some time out there practicing. It's a new team. We're still, still got some stuff to figure out, and it's hard to book your travel and not kind of get screwed by that, for
Mhm.
lack of a better word. As far as you try to change your flight either earlier or later, you're going to be paying for that. So we're likely going to stay for maybe not the entire time if we're out, but at least part of it, and spend some time in New Brunswick and get some practices in, and maybe go watch a little bit, and just sort of some team bonding, if nothing else. So yeah, we're thinking we'll probably stay for a bit, and yeah, the old I mean, even not the old skins games that I've played in a couple of them, and they were single knockouts, but they're only four teams. So
Hmm.
it's two semis and a final. So it's single knockout, but it's not really. Like it's,
Yeah.
you're immediately into the semifinal. It's a little different than this one. But again, I think that challenging the status quo and what's been done for years is a good thing, and it might work and it might not. But either way, trying to come up with new concepts, and I think that that's mostly to do with sports betting. I think points bet probably has a lot to do with the concept of it, making it essentially like a March Madness sort of a feel. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. It was a bit of a hard one to wrap our heads around as far as the cost of getting out to Fredericton for potentially one game, but I like that they're challenging it, at least that they're sort of trying to think outside the box. So that's good.
Well, one of the things I really like about it is, like you said, it's something different. And I think if you're going to try an event like that, this is the year to do it. Where
Absolutely, yeah.
off the top of my head, I mean, there's no Continental Cup this year. There's no Canada Cup. There's sort of a void there, and I think this is a great opportunity for them to try something new. And it might be amazing. It might be in a very electric atmosphere. It might flop, but until you actually run it and you give it a try, you don't really know what the impact of it will be.
Well, so there usually is a Canada Cup. This essentially is in lieu of a Canada Cup, this points bet
Hmm.
event. There usually is one in the first year of a cycle. But yeah, I think that it's good to be trying new stuff. And for sure, this is the year to do it because, you're not giving away direct trials berths and you're not, everyone's sort of still figuring out new teams and kind of jockeying for position. So yeah, I mean, like I say, I'm glad to see them thinking outside the box a little bit. I think that's good. But but yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how it goes because it's definitely a really foreign concept to anything that curling fans have ever seen and to anything that curlers have really ever done. So it's fun. I'm looking forward to it. I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about it when I'm there, but I'm excited.
Well, I'm sure it'll certainly be interesting, and like most, I'm a big March Madness fan. I watch it every year. I try to watch as many games as I can, and um, for me, I'm always one of those people. I love cheering for the underdogs to knock off one of the big players early. So I'm gonna take a close look at the bracket maybe after this weekend. I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head what the matchups are, but I'll be filling out my bracket. I'll have it posted on the wall while I'm watching. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, you're cheering for the bracket busters. I is what I hear you saying there.
Absolutely. So. Uh, Looks like we finished off there with a blank in this end. So it will be Dropkin with a 2 point deficit. Carruthers leads 4-2. We'll come back after a short commercial break for the final end. welcome back to Leduc, Alberta. My name is Matthew Hall. Joining me in the broadcast booth is Chelsea Carey once again, coming into, well, I almost said final end, but I guess there's always the possibility of some extra curling today. Looking at this situation, though, obviously Dropkin has to score 2 to have a chance. That's fairly obvious, but these are always the interesting situations where when you come down to the end of this end and you have maybe an easy shot for 2 or a very difficult shot for 3, I think a lot of times you'll see these top teams take on that shot for 3 where it's very unlikely that they make it, but it's probably more likely to make that shot to win the game now than it is to steal the extra against a good team like this.
Yeah, I think you'll see it. It's more so in men's curling. The difference is more lopsided in men's curling as far as your odds to win in the extra end. So I mentioned earlier, I think it's somewhere in the 85 to 90% range. I might even be lowballing that a little bit that the team with the hammer will win. So if your chances to make some kind of crazy slash double or something are 18%, that's still a better chance than you winning in the extra end. So you try it. In women's curling, it's a little bit more divided. I think it's closer to 70-30, something like that, that you might steal. So then again, you just weigh your like how often do I make this out of 10? If it's more than 3, then I throw it. If it's less than 3, then I probably don't. I take my 1 and go to the extra. So it becomes a numbers game to some degree. It also depends a little bit on ice conditions, on your opponent and what they've been doing that day and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think in men's curling, you're almost always going to see them take on a chance to win the game if they have it.
For sure. And just looking at the setup here, we see 2 not quite center line rocks for Reid Carruthers. One of them just biting the top left side of the forefoot, and he throws up a halfway tight guard after that. Korey, I mean, it's fairly straightforward. There's no real discussion. Tosses up 2 corner guards. Now, do you care whether or not you throw their 2 corner guards on the same side or you split the ice, or is it sort of you see where the first one goes and make the decision after that?
Yeah, for me personally, I think it's easier to throw them on the same side to not leave a double peel because you can line them up a little bit better. If they're off at all on the opposite side, it lines up the double peel. In this case, it turns out that the yellow rocks are sort of in the way of the double peel anyway, so it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Every team has their own kind of, again, their own sort of view on that, and it's likely based on your success rate or anything. Um, so yeah, I think it depends, but for sure, if you end up with one accidentally, if you're trying to throw 2 on the same side and the first one ends up in the middle, then you split them. And if you're
Mhm.
trying to throw, 1 on either side and the first one ends up long, well, then you have to go around it. So sometimes the execution can dictate where the second guard goes.
Absolutely. And I just took a look at the other stream, and we do have handshakes on the other sheet. It looks like it was score of 2, it seems, for Tanner
No, Horgan
Horgan.
Horgan was one up with coming home, so
Oh,
it was
okay.
just basically a run out of rock situation. So Tanner got 1 and wins that game, so that will eliminate Rylan Kleider and the new team Tanner Horgan into the playoffs, featuring the Horgan brothers along with Darren Molding and Colin Hodgson, formerly of Team Mike McEwen and Reid Carruthers.
Right. So maybe could be looking forward to a bit of a rematch, Reid Carruthers rematch later in the playoffs. Now, you're of course very familiar with Colin. You've played mixed doubles with him for the last number of years, I believe. Or is the plan to still continue doing that this season?
Yeah, that's the plan. It's a bit tough to plan it with both of our full men's and women's schedules, but we're hoping to get a couple events in and hopefully get into nationals and make some noise. We'll see what happens. But yeah, it's been a great partnership. Colin is one of my best friends. In his wedding party next summer, we've just been really, really close for a long time. So then when mixed doubles came up, it just made sense. And I think that it's smart in mixed doubles to have a back end player and a front end player. So you have a sweeper and a line caller, and that's what we do. So it works really good. He sweeps all the rocks, and I just yell at him. It's great.
You guys are definitely a great partnership. I don't know if you remember, you actually played against me last year and beat me in the Brantford Spiel. So that was a lot of fun. But you guys gave us a lesson in curling then.
I do remember that, and we had our backs against the wall in that spiel early, so we needed that win, but, I do remember that game, yeah, absolutely.
All right, so looking at this end here, if you're Corey, the opportunities here with these staggered guards now, I think at first glance, if you're not really paying attention to the situation, you might think that that's good for Reid, but the opportunity here may be to play a little bit of a split or a tap, or is he just going right around the corner? Looks like he's actually just drawing around the corner guard.
Yeah, I think for Corey, it's a pretty easy double peel. And if not, you have an angle run back if you needed it. Like, you're in a pretty desperate situation here to get at least 2,
Hmm.
so I think you have to just ignore that for right now and, loop around here, which is what he's doing if it gets to the house, and unfortunately for Corey, won't quite.
But still another guard. Now, of course, we've seen things are a little bit straighter. So today, so maybe difficult to sink one around that tight guard, but he'll have something to work with for sure. And I don't really think Reid. Uh, I wouldn't see him switching to try and just go around his own here. He's probably peeling something, right?
Probably, but the problem is with peeling something, it's if you're peeling something, it's that longer red guard, and your shooter's going into that stagger, which is helping you right
Hmm.
now. So is that worth it? Because he still has that corner guard. Right now, Corey can't use that guard on the left-hand side of the sheet as we look at it on the overhead because those yellow guards are in the way. So that corner guard is essentially not there. So if I was Reed, I think I might switch gears here.
And it looks like they talked about it for a little bit, but it looks like that's what the decision is. And I think you're right. Like if you sink one around here, it's Corey finds himself in a really uncomfortable situation. It'll be, I mean, just those angle runbacks in general would be so tough at the moment, but to have to do it and make a double with it would be even trickier.
Yeah, if you're making Korey Dropkin throw peels or runbacks, if you're Reed, you're really happy. So as much as it seems crazy, like you want to peel something, but there isn't really a good rock to peel
Yeah.
or an easy way to do it. Like if you could peel that red on the wide side, which I guess you could, but you run the risk of taking out your own shot rock if you hit it wrong. And clogging up the middle isn't hurting you right now if you're Reed. So I think this is the right call.
Yeah.
It
I
didn't
was just,
quite work out, but it's still not a terrible
yeah.
result.
Well, I was just about to say, like, thinking about it too, even if you don't make it perfect, now that's maybe not quite what I was thinking, where he touches the guard and rolls open. But even then, like, you're not in a position where you're scared of giving up three here. It's still going to be a lot of work for Corey to get his 2 points, and I think it would take a couple more misses out of the Carruthers team to really bring three into play. So at the end of the day, you don't really have losing the game in the back of your mind here, and you can sort of play a little bit more freely.
I agree. Not yet. I mean, if it might change at some point, but for right now, if you're Reed, you're sitting pretty a little bit, so you can afford to take a little bit of risk. Where if this had developed differently and was a little bit more open, then you'd for sure see him more in defense mode and saying, "Take your two if you can do it." But now you're looking at ending the game.
Hmm. This needs to curl. It will just end up chipping off that corner guard, and
Oh, that's a worst case scenario.
yeah, I mean, if that rock doesn't roll that extra foot, it might be okay because you'd still have a run back, but rolls partially buried behind those guards. And I mean, if this is the situation on your last with Corey, how do you even get at that shot stone without playing some sort of like thin redirect or something?
That's the only option you have right now is too thin. I think that well, obviously the one behind the corner guard, I'm not sure how much of it you can see, but if it's there, then it's a slash, and then the other way, it's a very thin redirect on the other side. That's you hear curlers say words like "don't hook it," they just hooked it. That's
Yeah.
not what you want.
And I'm looking at like, I'm even, these are kind of the tricky situations. I'm thinking of what you do if you're Reed, but anything you really try just might. I mean, the situation as it is, I don't really see a whole lot of good options for Corey. So anything that you might try might actually give him something. Now, here, I think they're looking to play the hit and roll into the rings, and there probably isn't a bad spot to roll it to. I thought they might even just sort of peel this out because it seems like this rock is the only option that Corey might have something off of at the moment.
I think what they're thinking though is that if you play the hit and roll into the rings, and even if you don't make it, now it's a yellow rock they're running in. So they
Hmm.
can't even make something good from it. They just can kill the one that's already there, but they still how do they get in there for two? And then you're throwing, right? So and if you make it good, which he just did, then like I mean, I don't want to say the game's over, but the game's pretty close to over right now.
Yeah, I mean, the only option that you have here, if you're Corey, is to try and rip some guards, and then maybe try and find a way for your two skip stones to score.
Yeah,
But again, like all he can do here is run yellow rocks, and there's never an opportunity really for red to sit in the rings after this. And Reid can assess the situation, but if Corey doesn't get everything moving, you just toss up another guard, and
yeah,
yeah,
exactly, and
it's
you're exactly right. It's the only option he has is to try to set it up for open it up enough that he can generate a skip deuce out of it, but it's looking real bad for Team Dropkin right now. So for Team Carruthers, I think that was a smart call because there wasn't really a bad place to roll, and if you make it as good as Jason just did, then you're you're really putting the screws to the young bucks here.
Stapera with the big weight, pretty much as good as he could have done. I think
Almost
I
worked out great. Yeah, I'm not sure he could
yeah.
have done any better, but if that spun off there at all, you might have had several options. But now the only good news about that where it stopped is now if you look at that outside red
Mhm.
on the left hand side of the overhead, it's sort of like you think sitting two is better, but it's to throw at some point. So that's the only slight bit of good news for Team Dropkin right now.
Yeah, it's a bit of a pocket to
It
aim
is, yeah.
at with that run back, and I think if you read, I was saying, well, if there's a pocket there, can you maneuver them around? And I was almost thinking it's like maybe that was something you would do on Reed's shot, not necessarily Jason's last. But as I'm looking at it, I mean, if you throw up the guard, he has to throw the run back,
Like
pretty
I
much.
wonder,
Like
I would be tempted to hit that red guard.
I was looking at that, and I think ideally you roll about a rock
Yeah,
and
and
still
but
guard.
anywhere on the inside, like even if you roll over and punch your yellow a little bit, I think it's
Mhm.
okay.
It looks like they've decided to come in, and I think this works too as long as you come down to that stone in the top of the forefoot and you push it back. As long as you don't roll open into the hole where you're going to leave Corey a hit and roll or something.
Yeah,
But
they're making this hole look easy. That's not that easy a shot. That was my only hesitation. This is the best result for sure. The best it's one of those the best guard is the second shot, but in this case it's third shot.
mhm.
But it's I mean, they made that look pretty simple. That's not that big a hole for a draw, but apparently they know what they're doing.
What if they left here? It's difficult to tell with the overhead. Could you ever throw big weight hit, make it through that hole, hit the yellow on the left, and make the
Yeah,
double sort of stick in there?
if that's available, then it's the shot to play for sure. It looks tough to me, but what you probably could do is run the red in on that angle, but the problem then is that you roll away.
Hmm. And I
If you
think
could
that's sort of your last resort too. If you ever do that now
yeah,
and you don't make it, well,
totally.
Reed just throws up a guard, and you might as well just shake hands. You don't really have anything. So
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So
at
if
le-
it's there, then it's the shot for sure. It's hard to I mean, I think they think it is because it looks like they're throwing it.
we'll see Andrew Stapera, his final rock here in the eighth end. Korey Dropkin in a lot of trouble, needs some help here. Makes it through the hole, and he
Ooh,
does make
great
it.
shot.
And what's really good about that, of course, you'd think, well, Reed can just sort of follow him down and pick it out, and he can, but with the way they made that double, this red isn't fully exposed, so Reed would likely roll out. And I mean, at the end of the day, he probably wouldn't be too upset with that. But now there's the opportunity. There's some space. Still a lot of work to do, but if Corey can find somewhere on his next stone to hide a rock, the opportunity for extra end is certainly there.
Yeah, if I was Reed, I'm not sure I'd be trying the hole. I might just be peeling this center guard.
That's probably uh Yeah, I think that's likely the smart call because I don't see anywhere that Corey could put it. I mean,
Can't
you're
take
always
away
just gonna
both,
have an
right?
open hit.
Yeah, like I think I mean, you could make it tough in the sense that he could have this exact same shot again.
Mhm.
But that's I think the best you can do. You can't take away both. You can like he'll have either a little slash on the red. I don't know. If you make it through this hole, it's great. But if you don't, now you potentially bring a 3 into play.
Right, if you ever pick out your own or something,
Exactly,
or
yeah.
do you ever is it worth it's probably not even worth it with the score the way it is to try run back. You're probably just straight peeling this all day, eh?
Yeah, I think so. You could play the run back, but the problem is if you just miss it low, then you
Mhm.
might screw yourself pretty badly.
I was thinking if that yellow in the rings was frozen to the red and there
Yeah,
really
then
wasn't an
then you try
opportunity to
it
pick
for
it out,
free.
then
Yeah, I think so. I think if it was a little different situation in the house, and I mean, I don't hate trying it because it's hard to hurt yourself if you
well,
just like
even if
even
you
if you pick
go
your yellow, it's not the worst, right?
well, yeah, if you're hitting it high side to pick out the
Yeah,
yellow, you're rolling out of the way, there's still gonna be an
exactly,
open stone to hit. You're
exactly.
probably going to the extra in that case, but,
Yeah, but that's okay. I don't mind trying it on the high side as long as you err on the side of just peeling it. It's like Connor's trying to get this to curl.
now they have Derek,
Oh,
so they
now
must be
straight.
close.
Oh, what a great shot.
A bit of a dagger in the heart, I think, of Korey Dropkin there. What do you
Yeah. Now
uh,
this wide red guard of your own is kind of hurting you because that's where you would like to draw around probably, but can't. Well, you can do it, but you'll leave it in the hole. But I think that's probably the shot.
yeah,
Get it?
I don't think there's any kind of hole on the other side, like between the yellow red.
No.
I
Yeah, I don't
don't
think so either.
so yeah, you can't throw the like you said, that red guard is in the way. You can't you'd love to if that guard wasn't there, sink an out turn draw to the back of the forefoot kind of thing.
Yeah, but
But
you can get to the side of the forefoot with this. I think that this is the play. You need a miss. Like the only way you're
yeah.
you're going to an extra end is with a miss. So you get this to the side of the forefoot buried, and then you hope Reid misses the freeze or the hole or whatever he's going to try to play, depending where your shot ends up. But I think it's your only chance of getting two.
Yeah, I agree. I've just been looking at everything else. I don't see anything. So make sure you get shot, and if you're dead buried, yeah, I mean,
He,
there's the freeze. There, if
he's
you're in
playing
the
run backs
hole,
or something,
yeah,
probably.
the
I
run
think
back, yeah.
ideally you leave this a little bit on the high side if you could, just because the freeze, like you said, could take it all away.
Hmm.
If you're right on the T line and he freezes to you, he'll be second shot, but you'll have no real way to get two.
Right.
So I think you want to leave this ideally just full eight sort of thing, like maybe biting forefoot, but no deeper than that, so that you have a draw if he plays the freeze or some kind of chisel or something. But that's the challenge. I think you got to make this and then hope that you get some sort of miscue out of him because I think if Reid makes his next one, whatever he decides to play, the game's over.
Hmm.
So you're hoping for a miss. So just make this good. If you're Corey, just make this good, sink it in there, ideally on the front side of the T line, and then hope that you get a miss from Reid, and then you might have a chance at the extra end.
So here in the eighth end, it's Korey Dropkin's first stone, excuse me. And it is a must make. Needs to put this somewhere in the rings where makes it difficult for Reid to have a chance to go to the extra. Sweepers don't seem to hate the weight early. It's all about line
Mm,
now, just making sure you get it buried.
trying to finish this now. Tom Howell on the inside. He's the outside sweeper, so that's an indication they're trying to get it to curl a little bit. Wait, looks close. So would have liked that a little higher in the rings, but had to get it buried as much as possible. So they swept it a little bit. Not bad. Again, you need a miss. So for Reid could try to pick this. I think he can probably see enough of it to just pick it if he wanted to. He could try a freeze. Um, I think
It's
those are
difficult.
probably the two options that he has.
Yeah, it looks pretty close to buried, but it definitely, if you can see a piece, I mean, with how much curl we've been seeing, you could play even a hack waiter and
Yeah, sorry, when
play
I
it
say
tight to
pick
the
it, I mean
guard.
like quiet and
Oh,
just
okay,
try to
okay,
just
yeah.
try to kill it. I don't think you're throwing weight at this because this is also a spot that we've seen run fairly straight with any kind of weight. But you could play it based on that ice. It looks like it's maybe a back line or a hack or something. You don't have to move it very far to sit two, which is all you really need to do to end the
Yeah.
game. So he just has to move it essentially to half 8 foot or further.
So delicate shot here. Of course, if he removes it from play, it's game over, but only needs to push it a foot or two to sit think even if he just sits 2, it's good enough, but don't need to push it far to sit 3. So final rock here in the 8th end for Reid Carruthers and the chance to put this game on ice. Definitely. Now they switch to put Derek on it, and they're
Oh,
switching, so it
Connor's
must be pretty
back, so it's got
close.
to be close. Derek to finish at the end here. I think he's fine. Oh no, it needs to curl actually.
Oh,
Oh, wow. That must have surprised them because at one point they were sweeping that Connor was on it to keep it straight. So a
yeah, they
little
were.
bit of not what they expected. They went back and forth a bit, but it was going. They were going for straight at one point there.
Yeah, I mean, when they were going back and forth, I thought, well, they must have it made. And then as it got to the hog line, I was like, well, that actually looks like it's getting by the guard by quite a bit. So
Yeah, it almost looked like it was going backwards a little bit. So a little straighter than they expected, I would suggest, just because of like you said, the back and forth usually is a pretty good indicator that you're close. And miss on the high side. So big shot here for Korey, big opportunity. I mean, we talked about the odds in the extra end, but given how this game has gone and how this end has gone, he'd be pretty happy to have a chance in the extra end. So here we go.
final stone in the 8th needs full 8 to score his second point and push this game to an extra end. Tom Howell on the left, Mark Fenner on the right as we look at the overhead. They seem to like the weight, so it's all about can it get enough curl to get into the full 8-foot for their second point.
Just needs full eight here. So Tom Howell on the inside, again, trying to make a curl, but no mistake there by Korey Dropkin. Great management by the sweepers. And we have bonus curling.
We're getting some value for our money here. 9 ends for the price of 8. 2 points there for Korey Dropkin. He'll tie up the game 4-4 after 8 ends. So we're going to go one more. They're going to bring the rocks down to the other end. We'll break quickly for commercial. And as soon as they start, we'll be right back in it. And welcome back to our bonus coverage here of this match between Dropkin and Carruthers. Dropkin scoring 2 points to go to force this extra end in the 8th. Of course, this is a C final, fighting for the very last spot in the playoffs here at the Alberta Curling Series Major Men's. And look game, I think we're in for some really exciting matchups in the playoffs. We got some good teams. Yannick Schwaller, Marco Hosley out of Switzerland. Team Yanagasawa doing very well in Martinsville, making the final last week and find themselves in the playoffs once again. Of course, John Epping, a perennial contender in the tour events in the last few. Parnjagoven very nicely making the tick. They're moving that redstone out of play, and really no option, I think, if you're Korey. You got to toss up another center guard here and hope he doesn't make a second tick.
Yeah, that's the challenge with being tied without. It's the proficiency with which ticks are made these days, especially on the men's side, but in both. It's a pretty common shot now. It's practiced a lot. Teams are really comfortable with it from both a throwing, line calling, sweeping perspective. It's just become a pretty makeable shot, which is why you've seen a few sort of nods to potentially making a rule against throwing it. Hasn't come into play fully yet, but that's certainly being talked about and has been tested at Worlds and Slams. So we'll see if it stays around. But yeah, it's hard to and Connor Negevin, one of the best leads in the game, is going to always be close on these.
And I wanted to ask you while we're on the topic, I know they implemented the no tick rule in at the World Championships. I can't remember. Did they also do it at one of the slams last year?
They've done it a few slams, but only in the last end.
Okay.
Typically. So it's not been for the whole game. It's just been playing 8 or the extra or whatever. But I do think you're going to see it. My issue with it is that the corner guard tick is actually easier to me than the center guard tick is, because you're just trying to punch it in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's fair to do something about one of them and not about the other one, because I think the 3 rock rule and the 4 rock rule did that a little bit. When in the 3 rock rule, you sort of gave the advantage to the team without the hammer because you didn't get 2 corner guards. So the team with the hammer kind of got the short end of the stick, and the team without the hammer got the good benefit of having 2 guards. And that shouldn't be the case. The hammer team should have the advantage. And I think that you're doing that again by eliminating the center guard tick, but not the corner guard tick. So now the team with the hammer can have their rocks ticked, but the team without the hammer won't. And I'm not sure I buy that, but I do think that something needs to be done about ticks, because we want offense in the game. We want it to be exciting for TV, for the fans. And the ticks sort of take that away. Like, as a player, I love them. Like, don't get me wrong. Selfishly, I want them to keep them. But for the betterment of curling, I think that something probably needs to change, but I'm not certain that I buy just the center guard tick being the issue.
Yeah, I wasn't sure when it was first announced. I was sort of against it. Initially, I'm not really a fan of, I think the tick is obviously a skill and it's a tool that the teams have, and I'm not necessarily a fan of just taking away a play that a team can do when it's sort of in their skill set. But at the end of the day, these rules are in place, or at least they're trying them to make the game more entertaining.
Exactly.
And
Well, I totally agree with you. Like I say, as a player, I want the tick because I
right.
want it's like my team's good at it. We always practice it with every team I've been a part of. So selfishly, yeah. But selfishly, I want to be able to. I don't want free guard zone. I want to be able to peel all the rocks when I'm up. Like we've
Mhm.
had to make rule changes. It's every sport. We've had to make rule changes for the betterment of the game in the sense of making it more exciting. And I think that the tick makes sense for that. But as a player, I'm with you.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, whatever the rules are, I mean, they could make up a completely new set of rules if they wanted. Eventually, people are just going to adapt to it, and they're going to learn
Absolutely.
to play the new game. We saw it with the 5 rock rule. I mean, when it was first implemented and teams were still getting used to it, we saw a lot more threes at the end of games, like teams able to claw their way back. And I think uh, nowadays teams have gotten so used to it and they've learned how to properly defend against it that now we're sort of back to the same old question. Well, now what can we do? And I think regardless of what the rule is, teams are going to be able to adjust it'll all sort of tend back to the norm in a couple years afterwards. But if it improves the fan experience, if it maybe takes that 90% win chance in an extra down to even 80, that's just more exciting for fans to watch. It's going to get more people coming to events and sticking around till the end of games, and that's ultimately what we want to see.
Yeah, I agree. I for sure everything's going to end up sort of normalizing, and it's always going to be an issue of like, where do we move the bar now? But I think that at the end of the day, what we want is for like as players, it's great. You obviously want to win, obviously, right? So that's easy enough. We as players, we want the rules to be a certain way, but I think it's important to take yourself out of the equation and think about it from a fan perspective. If I'm looking at other leagues, if I'm talking about the NFL or the NHL or whatever, and then I'm just a fan, I want the rules to be such that it's going to be exciting and that it's not going to, I mean, in theory, as little as possible, be a blowout.
Hmm.
So that's, like you don't want the game to be over when somebody's one up or tied. And right now it isn't, but it's closer than fans would probably like it to be to being over. So yeah, I think it's just one of those things. So you're trying to balance the fan experience with the integrity of the game.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, y- you do want the players to be the ones that drive the decisions. I think is ultimately what we'd like to see. But at the same time, like as you said, as players, we don't always maybe have the most unbiased opinions, because when rules change, there's always going to be that situation that you find yourself in where you end up losing a game that you never would have in the past when that before that
Right.
rule came into play, and that's just a part of sports, obviously. But like you said, selfishly, we'd love to be whatever the rules are that help us win at the
Well,
end
and I
of the day.
think,
So.
yeah, and I think that as players, we also need to take a step back and look at it not selfishly.
Hmm.
Like I look at my dad winning the Brier in 1992, and it was 4-3, and they just peeled everything for ends and ends, and that at the time was the way the game was played, and so there was some pushback to going even to any sort of free guard zone because there wasn't any then. And now we look back at that and think like, how did we ever play this game without the free guard zone? So it ends up usually being a good thing. It's just at the time now you're going to lose games that you wouldn't have otherwise lost because you would have just peeled every rock in play. But who wants to watch that? That's not exciting curling. It's not great for the people in the crowd. It's not great for the people watching on TV. And so I just think ultimately it's not what's good for the game. So as a player, I try to take myself out of it in those conversations and just go like, I think this is what's best for the game, even though selfishly I don't love it.
Yeah, and I mean, just like as we talk about this, I think back to believe it was before I was born, actually, but there was famously a Brier final, and
2-1.
Pat Ryan was, I believe, the one side. I can't remember who he was playing, but yeah, it ended up being like 2-1, 3-1, and
Yep.
famously during the middle of one of the ends, as they ran up and down peeling everything, somebody yelled out "boring" from the stands, and that's not what we want. We,
Yeah.
regardless of what the rules are, we want the fans engaged. We want them excited to be there, and
Yeah, and I think that that's the thing at the end of the day. We're trying to grow curling, we're trying to grow the game. So, and I mean, I say selfishly I don't want it, but if I'm down, then I do.
yeah,
It just depends what side of the game you're on, right? So like it's good for one team, it's bad for the other team, but if it's good for the overall fan experience, then the teams are split on whether they like it or not. Well, then it's still better.
exactly. I mean, as we've been talking, I've been watching this end, and maybe we should make some kind of a comment on it,
See?
but I'm not really sure what the comment is going to be. It doesn't look good for Dropkin here. Was never really
No.
able to get any guards up after those ticks, and
Yep, two perfectly made ticks in the end is, I mean, not over, but 80+% over.
yeah, I mean, the most Corey could probably do here is make Reid draw for a piece of the forefoot to win, which
Or
he's
hit
going to
and or
make
hit and
like,
roll out, yeah, which
yeah,
so,
yeah.
like, the game's essentially over. So you have to I think the only play for Corey is to draw around this. Reed's probably gonna peel it, and if he makes the freeze or whatever, then fine, but he's probably just gonna peel it,
Hmm.
and, then you draw the other side, and you make him either draw a piece of the forefoot or hit and stick against 2, and that's not like, your chances of winning that game either way are not very good.
No, but this is a spot we've seen them play a couple times off the center line, these draws, so I'd expect them to be pretty close. And I think what's nice about the shot is you don't necessarily care about slipping a little bit deep. Obviously, you'd like your last one to be placed in a pretty good spot here, but even if you go like back eight, um, it makes the double a little bit trickier now, albeit I think it would take a little bit of a miss for Reid even to take on a double. He'll probably just play a peel, as you said, but
Yeah, I think the important thing here is being buried. Like you sort of think you might want to leave this a little bit open, but the problem is then you leave them an angle for the double, and you don't want to do that. I think this needs to be fully buried, even if it's a little bit behind the tee line, because then it makes the double harder and longer. And if you just miss it on the low side, on the center line side, then maybe you have a better guard to come around. Again, you're hoping for misses here. So
and that one just maybe not slipping, going far enough, sort of stays out in the open. So probably see Reid make a play on it. I think he'd love to, if you could ever just hit and roll, even to the center line is fine. It'll still force Korey to make a tough, long roll when he plays a hit, but you roll to the other side of the forefoot, and there's nothing really Korey can do to not just leave you an open shot.
yeah, if he's probably still playing a hit and roll because it's the only option he has. So he'll hit and roll buried, but then he'll be back eight. So then for Reid, we'll have a lot of reins to draw to for the win. We haven't seen many errors from Reid Carruthers on his draw weight so far. So have to like his chances of making that. So yeah, for Reid trying to roll ideally to the other edge of the forefoot. If you could probably place it anywhere, you'd be sort of right biting the edge of the forefoot so that Korey would have a hard time drawing and being buried and shot, and also will be rolling behind the tee line if he does play the hit and roll.
So the opportunity here to make sure he has an easy shot with his last one, the out turn hit down the center line. Would love to roll a few rocks over to the other side of the rings. Got Connor on it now to hold it straight. Derek egging him on. And he will make the hit, remove that stone, roll to the other side of the button. And I think that's pretty much the perfect result there if you're Reid.
Yeah, definitely is. We'll see Korey jump in the hack pretty quick here and try to play this hit and roll. Like you say, he's going to be at best probably full eight biting the forefoot, but that's as good as he can do. Try to get this. Probably in this case, you don't need to be fully buried because Reid's likely ignoring it. So take a little bit more of the forefoot if you have it. Sit, half buried, half forefoot, and make him look at it. Maybe he considers. I don't think he'll consider chasing it, but that's the kind of thing you have to try to do here if you're Korey, because again, you're hoping for some kind of miscue from Reid Carruthers. Well, it's really close. Is
About as good
pretty
as you could do.
pretty much as good as you could do. Could have maybe left it a little bit more open, but you're making him hit full four. So, given how this end has gone and how this game has gone, if you're Korey Dropkin, you're pretty happy to have a chance right now. That being said, I quite like Reid Carruthers' chance of making this shot.
And this was a shot he made a few ends ago, albeit I think it was on the other side of the sheet, but I do remember him making a draw to the forefoot for his single point earlier this game. So they should have a good idea what the speed is, and as long as the sweepers aren't completely backing off out of his hand, I think he'll have a pretty good chance.
Yeah, again, the same thing I said the last time he made it. You've got two really good sweepers. They're big, they're strong guys. They're also just smart sweepers. They manage rocks very well. So give them a chance to kind of guide this in there for you. And if I were to bet, I would bet on him making this, but we'll see what happens. That's why we throw it.
And as you say, that final rock here in the 9th end of play, the extra end, Reid Carruthers needing a piece of the forefoot here to move on to the quarterfinals. Sweepers are on it early, and they haven't really looked up yet. Could it be a little bit light?
It was a little bit panicky early. They got to go. I think it's
Need
okay, but they got to go.
need a piece of the red to
It's
win
close. It's
it.
close. It's close. Oh, what a great sweep. I think they just got it there. They pounded that right out of his hand.
Wow, an amazing sweep. I'm sure Reid will have to send a little bit extra of whatever they end up winning this weekend to Derek and Connor after that one. They are taking a long look at it, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
there's the hand.
Dropkin extends the hand. He will concede the game. Reid Carruthers scores his single point. He'll take a 5-4 victory and move on to the quarterfinals, where they will play Riku Yanagasawa out of Japan. Other quarterfinal matchups all going off at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 o'clock Eastern. We'll have Yannick Schwaller against Aaron Sluchinski, Marco Hosley against Ryan Wiebe, and John Epping against Tanner Horgan. And you can catch all of those games on Curling Zone, Curling Zone's YouTube channel, presented by Curling Stadium. I'm Matthew Hall. Chelsea, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope we get the chance to do this again sometime soon. And thank you to everyone at home for inviting us into your homes and letting us bring this curling matchup to you. For now, though, I wish you a good night, and we'll see you back here again in just under 2 hours as we see the quarterfinals.